every day here on the Thom Hartmann Program, Louise and I and our team, Sean, Nate, Shira, Dave, Chase, Sue, Nigel, Ron, we all work to put together the very, very best show we possibly can. And there's an enormous amount of work that goes into the show. And one of the things that comes out of that is a lot of content, a lot of specific information that we go through and we dig out and, we want to share with you. And Sue puts that into our newsletter every week. And I think you will, if you don't already receive our newsletter, it comes in email every day, about an hour after we're off the air, or maybe a couple hours after we're off the air. And Sue goes through and pulls literally every link to every story that we talked about and puts it into the newsletter. It's free. We don't sell a list or anything. You complete safety and security. There's no charge. There's no nothing. Just, plug in your email address over at thomhartmann.com. And you get signed up for the newsletter. It's all fairly obvious. You'll see it on the website. So check it out, thomhartmann.com. Thank you. Book on the Thom Hartmann Book Report today, or Book Club today, is Cuban Women Confront the Future. It's an interview with Vilma Espin. Vilma Espin was the president of the Federation of Cuban Women since its founding in 1960, and was the chair of the Commission for Social Prevention and president of the Infancy Institute and the International Federation of Democratic Women. And it's a long-form interview, actually, the book. So the first question, what does socialism mean in the lives of a Cuban family, and in particular, Cuban woman? Vilma Espin. For the Cuban family, especially the woman, socialism has meant an enormous improvement to the quality of life and personal development. We should remember that until January 1st, 1959, in our country, hunger, poverty, exploitation, repression, and dependence reigned. The revolution opened up new horizons in the economic, political, and social fields, and amongst its key principles is the defense of equal rights for all human beings. The constant struggle to make ends meet disappeared, and with it the antagonism between people competing for the crumbs that could help them escape the tragic destiny that awaited the majority. Thus the family, the basic cell of society, could develop in a rounded way. Our revolution assured all Cubans the chance to exercise each one of their inalienable rights. Each citizen is assured that food prices are reasonable and that education and medical services are free. The state makes a systemic effort to improve living standards to the extent that it is permitted by the tense battle for development that we wage under blockade and constant imperialist threats. Child care facilities have been created to provide care for the children of tens of thousands of working women from the age of 3 months to 6 years. Services to lighten domestic work have been created. Hundreds of thousands of students have also received free lunch at day school and all their meals at boarding school. Hundreds of thousands of workers also receive their meals at a moderate price in their workplace. More industrial laundries and dry cleaners have been established, and more domestic labor-saving devices are available with preference in acquisition and cheaper prices for workers. Huge resources are dedicated to housing construction in urban and rural zones. We also try to guarantee recreational facilities and spiritual enjoyment to all the population. Of course, the possibilities are exciting, but also what we have achieved to date, considering our limitations, is already vastly superior to what families experienced in the past. Social Security provides an income for those who cannot work. As far as women are concerned, equal rights have certainly changed their position in the family and in society. A woman's participation in social production, because it implies her financial independence, has altered her dependent position in the marriage and allowed a change in her ideas, in the way she looks at life. The laws that govern family relations, such as the Family Code, are based on equality and guarantee the right of members of the family to participate in society, to work, study, and to responsibly educate the children in line with our revolutionary principles. This does not mean that we achieved all that we aspire to. We still have problems of a material nature to resolve, which are directly related to our economic development. There is still the need to eliminate backward ideas that some people hold, men and women, with respect to the role that each person should play within the home, the nature of the socialist family and the relationship between a couple, ideas which work against the full participation of women in the building of a new society. Obviously, the economic security guaranteed by both men and women having access to work, free health care, and education, the obvious satisfaction and confidence in oneself that equal opportunity and the chance to fully develop to the extent of one's talents, intelligence, and aptitude offer to each person, the constant motivation and emotional stability that comes from feeling useful, recognized, and dignified as a human being, Everything that socialism has brought to us undoubtedly fulfills the deepest desires of a family, particularly the woman, who until just a quarter century ago was exploited, oppressed, and marginalized in the family and in society. Question: what is the primary concern in Cuba, work or the human being? What place do women occupy within this concern? Velma Espin: in Cuba, a country that is building socialism, the highest aim is human happiness, based on respect for the fundamental human rights of each person. That includes full social equality to education, healthcare, work, and professional training, with the chance to employ all of one's faculties to take an active role in society and to help develop that society, to create the material and spiritual basis for a full, harmonious life, where the highest qualities of both men and women flourish. To reach those aspirations requires work, talent, dedication, and willingness from everybody. It requires constant scientific and technological innovation to assure economic and social development. Thus, each member of our society, along with the right to work and all the benefits brought by the revolution, has acquired the duty to help create the economic basis necessary for such advantages. The building of a new society and the fulfillment of new aspirations could not possibly be achieved except on the basis of work and the willingness of the whole population. And the people work with enthusiasm because work is the means for creating wealth and goods for all to enjoy. Work that is free from exploitation does require a new dimension, a quality that stimulates and produces satisfaction. To feel that you are useful and are creating your destiny, to project yourselves toward the future through your work, to cultivate the future. In a speech in January 1964, Che Guevara said that when each Cuban viewed work as a vital expression of their human creativity, technology, technique, and inventions would proceed apace, and all would participate with an uncontainable force in building the new society. The book, Cuban Women Confront the Future by Vilma Espin.
Want to connect with the show online? You can find the Thom Hartmann Program on Facebook, Twitter, and Instagram.
This is the Thom Hartmann Program.
Well, happy Monday. A beautiful day to you. I hope things are going well in your world and you had a nice weekend. I had a great time at the Opera Theater Portland over at the Alberta Rose Theater on Alberta Street here in Portland on Saturday and Sunday. Playing the old-timey radio announcer. It was spectacular, and met a lot of, had an opportunity to say hi to a lot of folks who listen to the program, who dropped by, and thank you for showing up if you were one of them. On Saturday, I was able to say hi to people and shake hands and sign things. On Sunday, I had to run right afterwards back to the green room for some just kind of wrap-up stuff that had to do with the performance. And so if I missed you, I'm sorry, but there'll be other events here in town. But that was great. Today is also Women's Equality Day, hashtag Women's Equality Day. And Mini-Me posted on Saturday over on DU something that, boy, I remember this. The following list is a list of 9 things that a woman couldn't do in 1971. Now, Louise and I were married in 1972, and I remember in 73 and 74, we were running a business. In fact, by 74, we were running a pretty good business in Michigan, and trying to get a credit card for Louise. And the credit card companies would only issue a credit card to her if it was basically in my name and I signed her application because I was her husband, right? It wasn't until 1974 that we got a law that said that credit card companies had to give credit cards to women, assuming that they were creditworthy, without their husband's, without demanding their husband's signature. It wasn't until 1978 that we passed a law that said that women couldn't get fired for becoming pregnant. It wasn't until 1973 that women could serve on juries in all 50 states. Why? Because they were too fragile to hear the grisly details of crimes and too sympathetic by nature to hand down harsh sentences, right? It wasn't until 1976 that women were, for all practical purposes, admitted into the real military. Up until 1973, women were only allowed in the military to serve as nurses or support staff. It wasn't until the 70s that a woman could get an Ivy League education. It wasn't until 1977 that workplace sexual harassment was outlawed. It wasn't until 1993 that spousal rape was outlawed. Women couldn't obtain health insurance at the same cost as a man until 2010. It wasn't until the mid-1970s that basically the birth control pill, I mean, it became available nationwide in 1961, but it wasn't until the mid-70s that all the states made it legal. I mean, they had actually outlawed it in many states, and a lot of pharmacies refused to carry it. Pretty amazing stuff. So anyhow, happy Women's Equality Day. We've come a long way, and we still have a long way to go. Now, what I want to do for a little bit here this morning is a straw poll on your presidential preferences. We haven't done one of these in a while. There's a Democratic debate coming up in, what, a week and a half, something like that, and 2 weeks. And I'd like to get a baseline, to find out where you all are at in terms of who you're supporting right now for president. So our phone lines are locked right now. In just a minute, I'm going to unlock them. And our telephone number, if you want to vote in this, is 202-808-9925. I'll say that again in just a minute. And we're going to do this without screening the calls. So I'm just going to put you on the air. We've got caller ID, so I can see your telephone number that you're calling from. And so here's how it'll work. All our lines will be ringing, and I will push a button for your line, and I will say, area code 303. Who is your choice? And you have basically one sentence, right? So say, I'm voting for Joe Blow because I think that Joe. Well, I shouldn't use Joe Blow because there's a Joe Biden, but I'm voting for XYZ because XYZ has a wonderful health care plan or is going to do something about climate change or whatever. But you have one sentence. And, ideally, I'd like you to say something nice about the candidate that you're supporting. In other words, explain why you're supporting that candidate rather than knocking somebody else. But if you feel the urge to knock somebody else, I'm not going to cut you off. But one sentence. So let's do it real fast. So, one brief sentence. So I'm unlocking the lines right now. And when you call 202-808-9925, when you call, I will put you on the air. And the way that you know that you're on the air, and by the way, this is true all the time, is you will hear a very loud whoosh, whoosh sound. That's me pushing the button, putting you on the air. It's a sound that's generated by our telephone hybrid equipment is what it's called, the stuff that puts you on the air. So let's just begin here. Area code 708, who's your choice? Hello? You're on the air. Who's your choice? Okay, let's try area code 847. Who's your choice? I'm not hearing anything. Are you not hearing anything either? Area code 630. Okay, I think we're going to have to reset our phone system. I'm in the right mode. I've got area code 630 up. You're sure everything's okay on the board? Okay. All right. I'm gonna talk about some stuff that's in the news, and we will try this again in a few minutes. And Nate is gonna, or Joyce or somebody is gonna go back and reboot our phone system. Nate is calling me. Say what? And I've got the phones locked. Yeah. So just reset the phone system back there, and we'll go on with that. Okay. So Donald Trump was just at the G7, and he just did a joint press conference with President Macron, and then he also did a standalone press conference, and it was interesting watching it. I was watching on CNN, and what was so amazing was that the reporters were amazed that Trump was lying through his teeth. The reporter from PBS actually asked him a question and then just said, well, why do you keep lying about this? Or words to that effect. And Trump, just like blasé, just kind of ignored it. He said something and then he contradicted himself minutes later on a couple of occasions. Last Friday, when China raised tariffs, modest 5% on some American goods, Trump freaked out and, just basically went nuts. And, on Twitter, and it kind of crashed the whole, the world's stock markets. And so this morning he said, oh, no, China has called us and they want to make a deal, right? They want to make a deal. They're looking forward to this. Everything's going to be good. Interestingly, I think it's Fox News is reporting that China is saying, no, we never called. We didn't do that. We didn't do that. So anyway, we'll see where this goes. The Amazon is on fire. Leonardo DiCaprio has, along with, I think her name is Lorraine Jobs, the widow of Steve Jobs, and a couple of other people have put together this new nonprofit for the environment, to help save the environment. And they just kicked in $5 million to save the Amazon. So we'll see where that goes. I'm going to try this again, okay? Our phones are reset. Area code 501, you're on the air. Can you hear me? Can I hear you? I cannot. Okay, it's got to be on our board then. So I'm going to take a break here, and we will be back in just a minute. We're going to try this in just a second, but we got to figure out why we're not getting audio into our board. Say what? Yeah, let's fill the break. And we'll be back. Hold off on your calls here until we get this all figured out. We'll be right back. It's the Thom Hartmann Program. It's Women's Equality Day. We can talk about that. Our food is killing us. We can get to that. The broccoli is dying. The corn is toxic. Oh, my. Stick around.
This is the Thom Hartmann Program.
We'll be back in just a moment. It's 16 minutes past the hour.
Mic check.
Here. Vilma Espin was the president of the Federation of Cuban Women since its founding in 1960, and was the chair of the Commission for Social Prevention and president of the Infancy Institute and the International Federation of Democratic Women. And it's a long-form interview, actually, the book. So the first question, what does socialism mean in the lives of a Cuban family, and in particular, Cuban woman? Vilma Espin. For the Cuban family, especially the woman, socialism has meant an enormous improvement to the quality of life and personal development. We should remember that until January 1st, 1959, in our country, hunger, poverty, exploitation, repression, and dependence reigned. The revolution opened up new horizons in the economic, political, and social fields, and amongst its key principles is the defense of equal rights for all human beings. The constant struggle to make ends meet disappeared, and with it the antagonism between people competing for the crumbs that could help them escape the tragic destiny that awaited the majority. Thus the family, the basic cell of society, could develop in a rounded way. Our revolution assured all Cubans the chance to exercise each one of their inalienable rights. Each citizen is assured that food prices are reasonable and that education and medical services are free. The state makes a systemic effort to improve living standards to the extent that it is permitted by the tense battle for development that we wage under blockade and constant imperialist threats. Child care facilities have been created to provide care for the children of tens of thousands of working women from the age of 3 months to 6 years. Services to lighten domestic work have been created. Hundreds of thousands of students have also received free lunch at day school and all their meals at boarding school. Hundreds of thousands of workers also receive their meals at a moderate price in their workplace. More industrial laundries and dry cleaners have been established, and more domestic labor-saving devices are available with preference in acquisition and cheaper prices for workers. Huge resources are dedicated to housing construction in urban and rural zones. We also try to guarantee recreational facilities and spiritual enjoyment to all the population. Of course, the possibilities are exciting, but also what we have achieved to date, considering our limitations, is already vastly superior to what families experienced in the past. Social Security provides an income for those who cannot work. As far as women are concerned, equal rights have certainly changed their position in the family and in society. A woman's participation in social production, because it implies her financial independence, has altered her dependent position in the marriage and allowed a change in her ideas, in the way she looks at life. The laws that govern family relations, such as the Family Code, are based on equality and guarantee the right of members of the family to participate in society, to work, study, and to responsibly educate the children in line with our revolutionary principles. This does not mean that we achieved all that we aspire to. We still have problems of a material nature to resolve, which are directly related to our economic development. There is still the need to eliminate backward ideas that some people hold, men and women, with respect to the role that each person should play within the home, the nature of the socialist family, and the relationship between a couple, ideas which work against the full participation of women in the building of a new society. Obviously, the economic security guaranteed by both men and women having access to work, free health care, and education, the obvious satisfaction and confidence in oneself that equal opportunity and the chance to fully develop to the extent of one's talents, intelligence, and aptitude offer to each person, the constant motivation and emotional stability that comes from feeling useful, recognized, and dignified as a human being. Okay, welcome back. I'm going to try this one more time. You will hear a loud whoosh on your phone, and that means you are on the air. So you are on the air. Can you hear me?
Yes, sir.
Okay, and I can hear you. Great. Okay. Our telephone number 202-808-9925. And so who are you supporting in the Democratic primary and why, in one sentence, please?
I am supporting Kamala Harris. The reason why is because I think she'll just run circles around Donald Trump as far as a debate, if he would be willing to debate her.
Okay, thank you for the call. You're on the air. Who are you supporting and why?
Looking forward to supporting Elizabeth Warren in the California primary for her unyielding support of the middle class, but I will be voting blue no matter who in the general, even if I have to crawl through daggum broken glass to do so.
Okay, thank you. You're on the air. Who are you supporting and why? And I think you're area code 575, right?
No, area code 716.
716. So that was the problem. Our screwy Comcast phone system, which is going to be replaced in the next week or two, by the way, is feeding me, funky numbers, or maybe it's adding a number. Anyhow, who are you supporting and why?
Supporting Elizabeth Warren, contrary to what Bill Maher said on his show on Friday night, that she would be the new McGovern. I don't think that she would lose 40 states. I think she would win 40 states. Thank you.
Yeah, I agree. I think she'd be the new FDR. You're on the air. Who are you supporting and why? Hello? Okay, you are on the air. Who are you supporting and why? Hello?
This is 909, right?
Yeah, that's right. You're on the air.
Elizabeth and Bernie.
Okay.
Either way. Thank you.
Okay, you're welcome. You are on the air. Who are you supporting and why?
I'm supporting Joe Biden because I think he has the best chances of beating Trump.
Okay, thank you. Again, you will hear a loud whoosh. That means that you're on the air. Who are you supporting and why?
I'm supporting Elizabeth Warren. I think she's extremely intelligent, articulate, and she has plans like FDR would have.
Great, thank you. You are on the air. Who are you supporting and why?
I completely trust him now, and I completely trust him as my president.
I can't hear this, Sean. Can you turn it up a little? I'm sorry, say that again, please.
Bernie Sanders. I trust Bernie now, and I can trust him as my president.
Great. Thank you. Who are you supporting and why? You're on the air. Okay, you need to listen for that whoosh. That means you're on the air. Who are you supporting and why?
Elizabeth Warren. She reminds me of a female FDR.
Okay, thank you. You are on the air. Who are you supporting and why?
Sanders Warren or Warren Sanders. Either way, that's been my dream team for a long time, Tom.
Okay, thank you. You're on the air. Who are you supporting and why?
Bernie.
Okay, and why?
He's the most honest and compassionate and bright.
Great, thank you. It'd be interesting to know, because I don't have accurate area codes here, where you're calling from. Just give us your city and state, and who are you supporting and why? You're on the air.
I'm supporting Bernie Sanders because I love his policies.
Great. And where are you calling from?
I'm calling from West Virginia.
Thank you very much. You are on the air. Where are you calling from, and who are you supporting and why?
I'm calling from Cupertino, and I'm calling and voting for Bernie. I think Bernie and Elizabeth Warren are the ticket, but I don't get the vice president. So.
Okay, thank you. You are on the air. Where are you calling from, and who are you supporting and why?
Bernie, because he wins the real poll, which is the numbers of people who contribute to him.
Okay, thank you. You are on the air. Where are you calling from, and who are you supporting and why?
McMinnville, Oregon. My top candidate is Julian Castro. He's got a plan for everything at julianforthefuture.com.
Thank you. You are on the air. Where are you calling from, and who are you supporting and why?
I'm calling from North Carolina, and I'm support Joe Biden.
Okay, and why?
Because he can beat Trump.
Okay, thank you. You are on the air. Where are you calling from, and who are you supporting and why?
Hi, I'm Jack from Huntington Beach, California. I'm supporting Bernie because I need Medicare for all to my Hep C. Thank you.
Okay, thank you. You are on the air. Where are you calling from, and who are you supporting and why?
Bernie, Kingston, Georgia.
Mm-hmm. Okay.
That's it.
And why?
Oh, well, it's got to be Bernie. He's the only one makes any sense.
Okay, thank you. You're on the air. Where are you calling from, and who are you supporting and why?
I'm calling from Princeton, Minnesota. My name is Jill. I'm supporting Bernie Sanders for everything he's supporting, but he signed the first U.S. Senator to say yes to move to amend We the People Amendment. Thank you.
Okay, thank you. You are on the air. Where are you calling from? Whoop, that one. You are on the air. Who are you? Where are you calling from? Who are you supporting and why?
414.
Mm-hmm.
Supporting Bernie Sanders.
Okay, and why?
Strongest candidate for Medicare for all, free college tuition, unions, and the environment.
Okay, thank you. You are on the air. Where are you calling from, and who are you supporting and why?
David from Tujunga, California. Elizabeth Warren, because she will make America fair again.
Okay, thank you.
Thank you, Tom.
That's great. You're on the air. Where are you calling from, and who are you supporting and why?
Woodacre, California. Warren Sanders, Warren, any way he can.
Okay.
They'll set the table for the next crew.
Okay,
thank you very much.
Yep. Whoops. You are on the air. Where are you calling from, and who are you supporting and why? You got 10 seconds here.
The Bronx. I'm supporting Bernie because he's just got it all. He's had it. He started everything.
Okay, thank you from the Bronx. Appreciate the call. We'll be back. It's coming up on 28 minutes past the hour. Stick around.
You're listening to the Thom Hartmann Program.
Let's stop.
Call 202-808-9925.
I'm starting to see a pattern emerge here, but we'll continue after the break. Our book today for the Thom Hartmann Book Club is A Woman of No Importance, The Untold Story of the American Spy Who Helped Win World War II by Sonia Purnell. This is from the prologue. France was falling. Burned-out cars, once strapped high with treasured possessions, were nosed crazily into ditches. Their beloved cargoes of dolls, clocks, and mirrors lay smashed around them and along mile upon mile of unfriendly road. Their owners, young and old, sprawled across the hot dust and were groaning or already silent. Yet the hordes just kept streaming past them, a never-ending line of hunger and exhaustion, too fearful to stop for days on end. 10 million women, children, and old men were on the move, all fleeing Hitler's ranks, pouring across the border from the east and the north. Entire cities had uprooted themselves in a futile bid to escape the Nazi blitzkrieg that threatened to engulf them. The fevered talk was of German soldiers stripped to the waist in jubilation at the ease of their conquest. The air was thick with smoke and the stench of the dead. The babies had no milk, and the aged fell where they stood. The hordes drawing overladen old farm carts sagged and snarled in their sweat-drenched agony. The French heat wave of May 1940 was witness to this, the largest refugee exodus of all time. Day after day, a solitary moving vehicle weaved its way through the crowd with a striking young woman at the wheel. Private Virginia Hall often ran low on fuel and medicines, but still pressed on in her French Army ambulance toward the advancing enemy. She persevered even when the German Stukas came screaming down to drop 110-pound bombs onto the convoys all around her, torching the cars and cratering the roads. Even when fighter planes swept over the treetops to machine gun the ditches where women and children were trying to take cover from the carnage. Even though French soldiers were deserting their units, abandoning their weapons and running away, some in their tanks. Even when her left hip was shot with pain from continually pressing down on the clutch with her prosthetic foot. Now, at the age of 34, her mission marked the turning point after years of cruel rejection. For her own sake, as much as for the casualties she was picking up from the battlefields and ferrying to the hospital, she could not fail again. There were many reasons why she was willingly jeopardizing her life far from home in aid of a foreign country when millions of others were giving up. Perhaps foremost among them was that it had been so long since she had felt so thrillingly alive. Disgusted with the cowardice of the deserters, she could not understand why they would not continue the fight. But then she had little to lose. The French still remembered sacrificing a third of their young menfolk to the Great War, and a nation of widows and orphans were in no mood for more bloodshed. Virginia, though, intended to go on the road, wherever the battle took her. She was prepared to take whatever risks, face down any dangers. Total war against the Third Reich might perversely offer her one last hope of personal peace. Yet even this was as nothing compared with what was to come in a life that drew out into a Homeric tale of adventure, action, and seemingly unfathomable courage. Virginia Hall's service in the France of summer 1940 was merely an apprenticeship for a near-suicide mission against the tyranny of the Nazis and their puppeteers in France. She helped to pioneer a daredevil role in espionage, sabotage, and subversion behind enemy lines in an era when women barely featured in the prism of heroism, when their part in combat was confined to the supportive and the palliative, when they were just expected to look nice and act obedient and let the men do the heavy lifting, when disabled women or men were confined to staying at home and leading often narrow, unsatisfying lives. The fact that a young woman who had lost her leg in tragic circumstances broke through the tightest constrictions and overcame prejudice and even hostility to help the Allies win the Second World War is astonishing. That a female guerrilla leader of her stature remains so little known to this day is incredible. Yet that is perhaps how Virginia would have wanted it. She operated in the shadows, and that was where she was happiest, even to her closest allies in France. She seemed to have no home or family or regiment, merely a burning desire to defeat the Nazis. They knew neither her real name nor her nationality, nor how she had arrived in their midst. Constantly changing in looks and demeanor, surfacing without notice across whole swaths of France, only to disappear again as suddenly, she remained an enigma throughout the war, and in some ways after it, too. Even now, tracing her story has involved 3 solid years of detective work, taking me from the National Archives in London, the Resistance Files in Lyon, and the parachute drop zones in the Haute-Loire, to the judicial dossiers of Paris and even the white marble corridors of CIA headquarters at Langley. My search led me through 9 levels of security clearance into the heart of today's world of American espionage. I have discussed the pressures of operating in enemy territory with a former member of Britain's special services and ex-intelligence officers from both sides of the Atlantic. I've tracked down files that were missing and discovered that others remain mysteriously lost or unaccounted for. I have spent days drawing diagrams matching dozens of code names with scores of her missions, months hunting for remaining extracts of these strange disappeared papers, years digging out forgotten documents and memoirs. The book A Woman of No Importance by Sonia Purnell.
Want to connect with the show online? You can find the Thom Hartmann Program on Facebook, Twitter, and Instagram.
Welcome back. Okay, as I just said, I am so looking forward to getting rid of Comcast as our telephone provider. My apologies for the call waiting. Louise was talked to two different service people at Comcast last week about this. They swore up and down the problem was fixed. Obviously, it's not. So we're just going to survive this today. But we're going to. Well, she's calling him again to raise hell. But anyhow, we're doing our straw poll here. So please let me know where you're calling from, city and state, who you're supporting, and why. So you are, and you'll hear this loud whoosh, which means that you're on the air. You are on the air. Who are you supporting? Where are you calling from? Who are you supporting, and why?
Chicago, Bernie Sanders, because he's the only one who will take on the military-industrial complex.
Okay, thank you. You're on the air. Who are you where are you calling from, and who are you supporting, and why?
Hi, I'm calling from area code 206, and my first choice is Bernie. His knowledge, wisdom, and experience as an elder statesperson, and Warren would be my second choice. And just briefly, if you could comment at some point on, do you think that Bernie Sanders will accept the VP spot? I'm guessing he's got his pride and he would not. But
yeah.
Maybe so.
I'm sorry. We don't have time for a conversation. Where are you calling from? Who are you supporting, and why?
I'm calling from Utah. I'm supporting Bernie Sanders for his compassion and Elizabeth Warren for her honesty and her listening ear.
Great, thank you. You're on the air. Where are you calling from, and who are you supporting, and why?
This is Dead Doug in Fort Collins, Colorado, and I support Bernie Sanders 100%. Warren is a good second choice.
Okay, thank you. I forgot to ask why. Where are you calling from? Who are you supporting, and why?
Salt Springs, Florida. I'm supporting Bernie Sanders because he's progressive on all issues, and he's got the longest history and everything to back it up. Thank you, Tom.
Great, thank you. Let's see here. You are on the air. Where are you calling from? Who are you supporting, and why?
Yes. Algona, Washington, and Bernie Sanders and Elizabeth Warren, because I just love how honest they are, and they will make America way better than what it is now.
Thank you. Where are you calling from? Who are you supporting, and why?
Hi, Shell Belfit, calling from Tacoma, Washington, and I support Bernie because student loans, environment.
Okay.
Bye, thank you.
Thank you. Where are you calling from? Who are you supporting, and why?
I'm calling from Pahoa, Hawaii, and Bernie Sanders because his message resonates with Trump's voters, and he can't be bought, and never once took a dollar from the NRA or fossil fuel industry.
Okay, thank you. Where are you calling from? Who are you supporting, and why?
My name is Brian from Beverly Hills, and I'm supporting Bernie Sanders because I think he has the most comprehensive plan, and he's walking the walk.
Okay, thank you. You're on the air. Where are you calling from? Who are you supporting, and why?
Hey, Tom. David from Tampa, Florida, and I am Andrew Yang gang.
Okay. And why?
Just because he's lived all the East and West Coast across the country for the last several years, starting businesses. He's seen it all. He's met a bunch of people before he ever even started thinking about doing this. But I know he's pretty much a pipe dream. So I would have to say vote blue no matter who.
Okay, thank you. Vote blue no matter who, yep. Where are you calling from? Who are you supporting, and why?
I'm calling from Salem, Oregon, and I'm supporting Bernie Sanders because he has nothing else to prove. He's walked the walk.
Okay, thank you. Where are you calling from, and who are you supporting, and why?
Hi, Bernie Sanders, and I'm calling from West Virginia, and that would be for health care, jobs, the environment, and the industrial complex. which, I know he's going to do a great job on all of that. He's
Great.
got his heart in it. Thank you.
Okay, thank you. Where are you calling from, and who are you supporting and why?
Rosa Lopez, Miami.
Mhm.
Bernie Sanders, because he speaks to what I believe in. Thank you.
Thank you. Where are you calling from? Who are you supporting and why?
Oklahoma, Bernie Sanders, his overall platform.
Okay, thank you. Where are you calling from? Whoop, there we go. Where are you calling from? Who are you supporting and why?
Seattle, Washington, Elizabeth Warren, because she's smart, and you can trust her.
Okay, thank you. Thank you. Where are you calling from? Who are you supporting and why?
I'm from North Central Washington, and I'm supporting Elizabeth Warren or Bernie Sanders because they're both deal with issues that need to be dealt with.
Okay, thank you. Where are you calling from? Who are you supporting and why?
Yeah, I'm supporting Bernie Sanders. I saw him 3 times this year, and Joe Biden has appeared once in San Francisco. I live in the 415 area code.
Okay, thank you. Where are you calling from, and who do you support and why?
Tempe, Arizona. I support Sanders, the most honest, progressive candidate who kept the same principles for over 40 years. But I got to say, it's going to be Warren Castro ticket for 2020. Let's turn it on the blue.
Okay, thank you. Where are you calling from? Who are you supporting and why?
Riverside, California, Bernie Sanders, because we don't need another old white guy in the White House.
Okay, thank you. Where are you calling from? Who are you supporting and why?
Calling from Pasadena, Texas, supporting Bernie. The reason is because he's the only candidate I trust to not destroy Medicare and Social Security.
Okay, thank you. Where are you calling from? Who are you supporting and why?
St. Paul, Nebraska, Bernie Sanders, Elizabeth Warren, because they're the only two that are going to really work for us.
Thank you. Where are you calling from? Who are you supporting and why?
Washington State, Elizabeth Warren. She can unify the Democratic Party and win this election.
Thank you. Where are you calling from? Who are you supporting and why?
Bernie, he should be vice president right now.
Okay, thank you. Where are you calling from? Who are you supporting and why?
Wheaton, Illinois, and Bernie Sanders. He's going to eventually move us to publicly funded elections.
Okay, I'm noticing a theme here. Where are you calling from? Who are you supporting and why? Hello? Okay. Where are you calling from? Who are you supporting and why?
San Diego, California.
Mm-hmm.
Bernie Sanders.
Okay, and why?
He's the one that is going to fix all the problems and sees the way to fix all the problems and saw how they were getting messed up along the way.
Okay.
Because he goes back so far.
Got it.
So,
Thank you. Thank you. Where are you calling from? Who are you supporting and why?
Minneapolis, Minnesota. I'm with Warren, her financial background and experience, along with Julian Castro, his youth, his HUD experience, and his differential parts of the country. Thank you, Tom.
Thank you. Where are you calling from? Who are you supporting and why?
310, and I'm supporting Bernie Sanders and Elizabeth Warren. And I'm doing it because we are out of time. We get anybody else.
Got it.
Bye-bye.
Thank you. Where are you calling from? Who are you supporting and why? Hello? Okay, let's try another call here. Where are you calling from? Who are you supporting and why?
Lombard, Illinois, and Elizabeth Warren all the way.
Okay, and why?
I love her policies. I think she'll work for the people.
Okay, thank you. Where are you calling from? Who are you supporting and why?
Calling from Santa Monica, California, and supporting Bernie Sanders because he's on the right side of every issue.
Thank you. Where are you calling from? Who are you supporting? Whoop. Okay, let's try this one. Where are you calling from? Who are you supporting and why?
I'm supporting Bernie Sanders and Elizabeth, and he never wavers from his stances, and I think he could hit the floor with Trump.
Okay, thank you. Where are you calling from? Who are you supporting and why?
North Carolina, and I'm supporting Bernie Sanders. He has the best record of all.
Thank you. Where are you calling from? Who are you supporting and why?
Debbie Sari, Studio City, California. Bernie Sanders, because you can't beat his honesty.
Okay, thank you. Where are you calling from? Who are you supporting and why?
Chicago, Illinois. Elizabeth Warren, Bernie Sanders, close second, mostly just because of they feel about corporations and wanting to fight against them.
Okay, thank you. Where are you calling from? Who are you supporting and why?
I'm supporting Bernie and Elizabeth. I'm calling from Winter Springs, Florida. Thank you.
Thank you. Where are you calling from? Who are you supporting and why?
Because he supports us.
Say that again. You said Bernie?
Yep.
Okay.
Monroe Key, Florida.
Thank you very much. Where are you calling from? Who are you supporting and why?
Hello, yes, Arizona.
Mm-hmm.
And I'm supporting Buttigieg.
Okay, Buttigieg. And why?
Why is because, let's see, he has military experience. Trump's a dodger. He can talk intelligence against Trump's double talk, and he's the only one that can beat Trump.
Okay, thank you. Where are you calling from? Whoop. Where are you calling from? Oh, that didn't work. Where are you calling from? Who are you supporting and why?
Bernie Sanders, Elizabeth Warren, either one, and Julian Castro for VP.
Okay, thank you. Well, I didn't get the where or why. Where are you calling from? Who are you supporting and why?
Bernie Sanders, Upland, California, because he's the one that's been in Congress the longest and knows all the laws that have been changed to create this mess.
Thank you. Where are you calling from? Who are you supporting and why?
There will be Bernie Sanders, Elizabeth Warren, and the reason is they get us out of the mess Republicans have put us in.
Okay, thank you. Where are you calling from? Who are you supporting and why?
847, Bernie Sanders, because the progressive wing wouldn't have an agenda without Bernie Sanders.
Okay, thank you. Where are you calling from? Who are you supporting and why?
Yeah, my name's Robbie. I'm from Portland, and I'm supporting Bernie Sanders.
Okay. Hey, Robbie, I saw you at the event this on Saturday, right?
Hey, that was wonderful. I really enjoyed that. Thanks for getting me out of the house. Could I use 20 seconds to plug my Bonds Over Borders real quick?
No, but you can call back later and do it, Robbie. I want to finish this. Thank you for the call. I'm always hanging up on Robbie. It's become a thing with us. But he's a great guy. Anyhow, where are you calling from? Who are you supporting and why? Hello? Okay. Where are you calling from? Who are you supporting and why?
Talent, Oregon. I haven't changed. It is still Elizabeth and Julian. They're progressive plans, sane plans for the U.S. and the planet with humanity, intelligence, integrity, and ethics, something missing from this administration. I still want to see Barack Obama as Secretary of State for at least 2 years.
There you go.
And vote blue.
Whoop, I'm sorry. Where are you calling from? Who are you supporting and why?
I'm supporting Bernie Sanders and Elizabeth Warren.
And where are you calling from and why?
And because Bernie Sanders was sabotaged by Hillary Clinton the last time. He's back, she's not, and he's got the best track record of everyone.
Okay, thank you. Where are you calling from? Who are you supporting and why?
Jim from Ohio. I'm supporting Elizabeth Warren because she has experience teaching special needs kids, and that she'd be able to explain things so the rest of America would understand how the government works.
Yeah, maybe even explain them to Trump. Thank you. Where are you calling from? Who are you supporting and why?
Brooksville, Florida. Bernie Sanders, because I remember living between 42 and 80.
Okay, thank you. Where are you calling from? Who are you supporting and why?
Elizabeth Warren, because she's strong enough to hit back at Trump.
Thank you. Where are you calling from?
Maryland.
Maryland? Okay, thank you. Where are you calling from? Who are you supporting and why?
Livingston, Texas, Bernie Sanders, because he's the only one I can trust.
Thank you. Where are you calling from? That one. Where are you calling from? Who are you supporting and why?
I am supporting Elizabeth or Bernie because the main issue is medical issues, and we're out of excuses for this.
Yeah, there you go.
We need to get this done.
Okay, thank you. Thank you very much. Well, we're gonna pull a plug on this, and I'll give you the totals, the tabulation here right after the break, and then I've got some other stories I want to get into with you too.
You're listening to Thom Hartmann. Visit thomhartmann.com for audio and video archives.
Some serious thoughts on the state of our planet, what's going on in the Amazon, why and how. I'll get to that in just a moment. Stick around. But no more calls. And welcome back. I just, but so we're not taking vote calls anymore. But if you want to call and have a conversation about, what you think about the election, something like that, that's fine. Oh, you've got the total. Thank you very much, Joyce. Okay, and we'll get to that on the other side of the break as well. So let's just pick up some phone calls here. And Joyce, you can start screening calls if you want. Hi, where are you calling from, and who are you supporting, and why? And let's talk. Hello?
Hello?
Yeah, you're on the air. Where are you calling from?
Okay, Tom. I'm calling from Utica, Michigan, and I'm for Bernie Sanders and Liz Warren because they can't be bought, and they put a higher value on people and not money.
Yeah. It's really remarkable that these two candidates who are not taking corporate money and not doing corporate fundraisers, and I think that there's probably 2 or 3 others who are in that category, but I'm not exactly certain that they've gotten this far. I think it's a real statement of how sick people are of our body politic, of how things are.
Tom, people are hungry for honesty in government. And they represent honesty and dedication to our Constitution.
Yeah.
I'm for Bernie. I'm for Liz Warren. Either one. They're good people.
Yeah, I think you're absolutely right. Thank you very much for the call. Hi, you're on the air. Where are you calling from, and who are you supporting, and why?
Hi, I'm from New York, and I'm really torn between Bernie and Elizabeth because they're both excellent, and the reasons why are just too numerous to list because of all the policies that they have that are for the people that live here.
Yeah. Do you think that Elizabeth Warren, being a woman after Hillary, America was, I think, really ready for a woman president, and 3 million of us more voted for Hillary than Trump. Do you think that Elizabeth Warren, that her gender specifically and exclusive, or not exclusively, but specifically offers her an advantage over Bernie as a consequence of that?
No, I don't think so. I think that we've gotten past that point, and I really think that the reason she's a strong candidate is because she lays out her policies, and she's very clear and delineated. And I think that she, like Bernie, will not be intimidated by Trump. And I think that they don't play the same games that most politicians play. And I think they've proven that over the many, many years that they've been in Washington.
Yeah, I think you're absolutely right. I think if either one of them were the candidates, I would bet money that Donald Trump will refuse to debate them.
Absolutely.
Yeah, because he didn't participate in at least one, maybe more, of the Republican debates. He's done that before.
No, and because he really has specific to answer, to contribute, to debate. He's, he wants to just use words like they're little pieces of salt that you scatter all over the floor. I mean, he just isn't focused at all, and they would wipe the floor with him.
Yeah, I'm with you. Thanks a lot for the call. We'll be back in just a moment. Stick around. It's the Thom Hartmann Program. It's 8 minutes before the hour. Welcome back. Thom Hartmann here with you. Okay, here's our tabulation. Okay. You can pot down the music on the nonprofit side. Welcome back. Thom Hartmann here with you. And okay, here's our tabulation. Bernie Sanders got 48 votes. Elizabeth Warren got 27 votes. Julian Castro got 3 votes. Joe Biden got 2 votes. And then 1 vote each were Andrew Yang, Kamala Harris, and Pete Buttigieg. So that's interesting. No votes at all for Beto or Tim or Amy Klobuchar, Tulsi Gabbard, Cory Booker, Bill de Blasio, Michael Bennet, 0. Marianne Williamson also. So, you know, we live in interesting times, right? But it seems to me that the listeners of this program, and, you know, I'm guessing probably, you know, progressives nationwide are, you know, really interested in seeing Bernie Sanders and Elizabeth Warren. So we're live on comm, right? We are now. We are, okay. So once again, the vote was 48 for Bernie, 27 for Elizabeth Warren, 3 for Julian Castro, 2 for Joe Biden, and 1 each for Buttigieg, Harris, and Yang. So I'm looking forward to the debates coming up. I think it's going to be real interesting, and we'll see where all that goes. Let's see here. Robbie in Portland. Hey, Robbie, you wanted to talk about the DNC convention?
Oh, yeah, Tom. I was hoping I could plug Bonds Over Borders, but if you don't want me to...
No, go for it. Go for it. I got the paper you gave me.
Hey, tomorrow night, I just want to let everybody know in the Portland area, there's going to be a wonderful comedy show. It's honestly, we charge $20 for it. It's a fundraiser for Innovation Law Lab. Innovation Law Lab, you should check them out. They just had an article written by Wired.com, but they're doing wonderful stuff for immigrants who are trying to basically, become naturalized. What happens a lot of times is they'll actually, I'll let people research Innovation Law Lab. They're trying to do wonderful stuff, so we're trying to support them here.
So where can people find out about Bonds Over Borders?
Facebook, Bonds Over Borders. There's a Facebook event page. There's an Instagram, Bonds Over Borders. We're going to be doing another one, and I believe the date's October 5th. We're going to be fundraising for Pueblo Unido next time around. Anyway, another great one. But we have so many great. If you're into
and Bonds Over Borders. Why bonds? BONDS. Bonds are, typically you think of government bonds. Why that word?
Well, actually, for the most part, we're providing legal. We're not providing legal representation, but we're fundraising for legal representation for the immigrant community. It's a double entendre on words. Basically, a bond can be more than just what you post. It can be something that you establish with your community, which is why we're trying to get this. I feel there's a lot of people that are trying to help right now. I think that there's people that are, it's like a lot of people don't know. I'm an activist. I've always have been. I'm always out there doing what I can, and I know that there's a lot of people that work full time. They have families. They have stuff that they can't do, and so we're trying to bridge that gap. So we're trying to create these bonds over the borders that we're seeing, which is oppressing our people. So anyway, Bonds Over Borders is tomorrow night. I'm sorry, what was that?
So it's a double entendre on bail bonds and also building human bonds.
Correct. And actually, I believe in about 3 months, we are going to be supporting an organization which actually does post bail for them. But anyway, thank you very much. It's tomorrow night at the Ace Cleaners Hotel. Thanks a lot, Tom.
Okay. Thanks a lot, Robbie. Good luck with that event. I hope it works out really well. We'll be back. We're going to have a guest here in just a minute. Dr. Omar Bartov is professor of European history and has this astonishing new book, Anatomy of a Genocide. How does genocide happen? We'll be back with that in just a moment.
You're listening to Thom Hartmann.
We say fight back!
every day here on the Thom Hartmann Program, Louise and I and our team, Sean, Nate, Shira, Dave, Chase, Sue, Nigel, Ron, we all work to put together the very, very best show we possibly can. And there's an enormous amount of work that goes into the show. And one of the things that comes out of that is a lot of content, a lot of specific information that we go through and we dig out and, we want to share with you. And Sue puts that into our newsletter every week. And I think you will, if you don't already receive our newsletter, it comes in email every day, about an hour after we're off the air, or maybe a couple hours after we're off the air. And Sue goes through and pulls literally every link to every story that we talked about and puts it into the newsletter. It's free. We don't sell a list or anything. You complete safety and security. There's no charge. There's no nothing. Just, plug in your email address over at thomhartmann.com. And you get signed up for the newsletter. It's all fairly obvious. You'll see it on the website. So check it out, thomhartmann.com. Thank you. Our book today for the Thom Hartmann Book Club is A Woman of No Importance, The Untold Story of the American Spy Who Helped Win World War II by Sonia Purnell. This is from the prologue. France was falling. Burned-out cars, once strapped high with treasured possessions, were nosed crazily into ditches. Their beloved cargoes of dolls, clocks, and mirrors lay smashed around them and along mile upon mile of unfriendly road. Their owners, young and old, sprawled across the hot dust and were groaning or already silent. Yet the hordes just kept streaming past them, a never-ending line of hunger and exhaustion, too fearful to stop for days on end. 10 million women, children, and old men were on the move, all fleeing Hitler's ranks, pouring across the border from the east and the north. Entire cities had uprooted themselves in a futile bid to escape the Nazi blitzkrieg that threatened to engulf them. The fevered talk was of German soldiers stripped to the waist in jubilation at the ease of their conquest. The air was thick with smoke and the stench of the dead. The babies had no milk, and the aged fell where they stood. The hordes drawing overladen old farm carts sagged and snarled in their sweat-drenched agony. The French heat wave of May 1940 was witness to this, the largest refugee exodus of all time. Day after day, a solitary moving vehicle weaved its way through the crowd with a striking young woman at the wheel. Private Virginia Hall often ran low on fuel and medicines, but still pressed on in her French Army ambulance toward the advancing enemy. She persevered even when the German Stukas came screaming down to drop 110-pound bombs onto the convoys all around her, torching the cars and cratering the roads. Even when fighter planes swept over the treetops to machine gun the ditches where women and children were trying to take cover from the carnage. Even though French soldiers were deserting their units, abandoning their weapons and running away, some in their tanks. Even when her left hip was shot with pain from continually pressing down on the clutch with her prosthetic foot. Now, at the age of 34, her mission marked the turning point after years of cruel rejection. For her own sake, as much as for the casualties she was picking up from the battlefields and ferrying to the hospital, she could not fail again. There were many reasons why she was willingly jeopardizing her life far from home in aid of a foreign country when millions of others were giving up. Perhaps foremost among them was that it had been so long since she had felt so thrillingly alive. Disgusted with the cowardice of the deserters, she could not understand why they would not continue the fight. But then she had little to lose. The French still remembered sacrificing a third of their young menfolk to the Great War, and a nation of widows and orphans were in no mood for more bloodshed. Virginia, though, intended to go on the road, wherever the battle took her. She was prepared to take whatever risks, face down any dangers. Total war against the Third Reich might perversely offer her one last hope of personal peace. Yet even this was as nothing compared with what was to come in a life that drew out into a Homeric tale of adventure, action, and seemingly unfathomable courage. Virginia Hall's service in the France of summer 1940 was merely an apprenticeship for a near-suicide mission against the tyranny of the Nazis and their puppeteers in France. She helped to pioneer a daredevil role in espionage, sabotage, and subversion behind enemy lines in an era when women barely featured in the prism of heroism, when their part in combat was confined to the supportive and the palliative. when they were just expected to look nice and act obedient and let the men do the heavy lifting. When disabled women or men were confined to staying at home and leading often narrow, unsatisfying lives. The fact that a young woman who had lost her leg in tragic circumstances broke through the tightest constrictions and overcame prejudice and even hostility to help the Allies win the Second World War is astonishing. That a female guerrilla leader of her stature remains so little known to this day is incredible. Yet that is perhaps how Virginia would have wanted it. She operated in the shadows, and that was where she was happiest, even to her closest allies in France. She seemed to have no home or family or regiment, merely a burning desire to defeat the Nazis. They knew neither her real name nor her nationality, nor how she had arrived in their midst. Constantly changing in looks and demeanor, surfacing without notice across whole swaths of France, only to disappear again as suddenly, she remained an enigma throughout the war, and in some ways after it, too. Even now, tracing her story has involved 3 solid years of detective work, taking me from the National Archives in London, the Resistance Files in Lyon, and the parachute drop zones in the Haute-Loire, to the judicial dossiers of Paris and even the white marble corridors of CIA headquarters at Langley. My search led me through 9 levels of security clearance into the heart of today's world of American espionage. I have discussed the pressures of operating in enemy territory with a former member of Britain's special services and ex-intelligence officers from both sides of the Atlantic. I've tracked down files that were missing and discovered that others remain mysteriously lost or unaccounted for. I have spent days drawing diagrams matching dozens of code names with scores of her missions, months hunting for remaining extracts of these strange disappeared papers, years digging out forgotten documents and memoirs. The book A Woman of No Importance by Sonia Purnell.
Want to connect with the show online? You can find the Thom Hartmann Program on Facebook, Twitter, and Instagram.
This is the Thom Hartmann Program.
Welcome back. Thom Hartmann here with you. Just to recap, we just did one of these straw polls where everybody calls in and says, here's who they're supporting for president. And we had Bernie Sanders had 48 votes. Elizabeth Warren got 27 votes. Julian Castro got 3 votes. Joe Biden got 2 votes, and 1 each for Pete Buttigieg, Kamala Harris, and Andrew Yang. So I find that fascinating. You know, we get books here constantly, and we do this this book report that for our nonprofit stations and our free speech TV viewers, while our commercial stations are having their news at the top and the bottom of the hour, we just play a little excerpt from a book, you know. And so we get all these books, and this one came across my desk last week and just astonished me. It's Anatomy of a Genocide, by Dr. Omar Bartov, excuse me. And I wanted to get into a deep dive conversation about this. I find it just fascinating. So on the line with us is Dr. Omar Bartov. Am I pronouncing your name right, sir?
Bartov is correct, yes.
Thank you, Bartov. You're with Brown University, the John P. Birkeland Distinguished Professor of European History, Professor of History, and Professor of German Studies, the author of numerous books, and this is your most recent Anatomy of a Genocide, the website brown.edu. Thank you for being with us, Dr. Bartov. First of all, tell us about where this takes place.
Well, first, thank you for having me. The book is about a town that exists now in western Ukraine. It used to be in Poland in the interwar period, and before World War I, it was in the Austro-Hungarian Empire. So it's in an area where the borders changed quite a bit in the 20th century.
Mm-hmm. Okay, so what were the things that led up to the genocide that happened there?
Well, there's a short history of it and a long history, and I was more interested in the long history. And the short history is that in July 1941, the Germans entered this area
and they soon begin killing the Jews in that area. And primarily between late summer of 1942 and early summer of 1943, they murdered the entire Jewish population of this town and, of course, of the surrounding towns and, in fact, of this whole region, which is called Galicia. The long history is what interested me more, which is that this was not simply a town where there were only Jews, but a town where there were Jews, Poles, and Ukrainians living side by side. And what happened in that genocide and what happened in so many other cases, both in the Holocaust and in other genocides, was that neighbors started participating in an event that had been planned by the people who came from outside, by an outside force. And so it's both a large genocide in the sense that it's a continent-wide program, and it's a very local event in which neighbors, people who know each other, are participating in mostly killing and sometimes helping their own neighbors.
This is the thing that I think so many of us have a hard time wrapping our heads around, Dr. Bartov, and that is that if we look at history, we find time after time after time, and it's not unique to any particular culture. We saw this in Rwanda. We saw this, in World War II. We're watching it right now in Myanmar, where people literally turn against people that have been their neighbors. I mean, literally their next door neighbors for their entire lifetimes. People that they know, people that their kids play with each other, that they know each other. I mean, it's just, and suddenly they become homicidal. They kill people. What is it that leads to this? Is there any consensus on what flips that switch that turns us into homicidal maniacs?
Well, I don't think there is a consensus. I was trying to figure that out as an historian. And as an historian, I can say that when we look in retrospect what created such a situation, we will find that over time, different groups had started thinking of others living in their midst as either not belonging or being insidious, being dangerous to them, or being outsiders of their own society. And in the case of Eastern Europe, and as in many other cases, this is politically mobilized by nationalism. So once you argue that this place is yours and not of your neighbors, those who have a different religion or a different ethnicity, or as you would call it, a different race, then you say, well, they don't belong here. And not only do they not belong here, but their success is our failure. They're taking away our resources. They're endangering us. And so that begins a conversation where some people should be in and belong, and some people don't belong and should be kicked out or killed. Now, that's not always then, doesn't always lead to killing or to genocide, because there's usually a state, there's usually some control over it, and people just can't do what they like. But if the authorities, whichever they are, the local authorities or an army that comes in, or a new occupying force, gives license to doing that, and in fact makes that also into their own agenda, then this kind of potential violence becomes real violence. And what is perhaps even more horrifying about it is that often, because these are people who know each other, in order to be able to kill their own neighbors, they use a great deal of gratuitous violence as well, because they have to transform people that they know, whose children studied with their children, who were their neighbors, their colleagues, their friends, into something that is inhuman, into something that doesn't look like them. And so once this process begins, it's one that will, if it's not stopped, then will continue until the population is, so to speak, simplified. That is, there's only one group left there.
And this is the same sort of thing we saw in the former Czech Republic or the former Yugoslavia.
Yes, when I started writing this book, which was a long time ago, I started this in the 1990s, and the 1990s, the early 90s, as you remember, we were told that now communism was over and therefore history ended, and now we would be living in a wonderful world. And right after that, there were two genocides, one in Bosnia, in the former Yugoslavia, and one in Rwanda. And in both those cases, there was very intimate violence, fraternal violence. It was also the time that people started speaking about the Holocaust as a major event in European history, which had not been the case before. It hadn't been recognized as such before. But it was seen as something that was mechanized, that was very, that was based on distancing between the perpetrators and the victims. And I wanted to know whether there was a relationship between such events as the Holocaust and these more recent genocides. And once I started looking at a single town, I realized that on the local level, it was very, very similar. It was actually very intimate. It was among people who knew each other. And there had been a kind of rhetoric that developed over time. In Rwanda, for instance, the Hutu described the Tutsi as cockroaches. The Germans spoke about the Jews as vermin. So you animalize people. You make them into something that is not of your own society, that is not even human. And that gives you that license then to treat them differently and even to kill, murder them.
So if I can restate my understanding of what you just said, the things that lead to genocide is you start out with characterizing one group within the society as an other, as being different and presumably inferior to everybody else.
And insidious often.
Okay, yeah, so you vilify them as well.
Mm-hmm.
And then at some point, what flips the switch is that people who are all cranked up about this and all upset about these people in their midst feel like they've been given permission by the government or by society to turn that rage into murder. I mean, is that not what this guy who went down in Texas, who drove 800 miles to kill 22 Hispanic people, thinking that he was doing what Donald Trump was telling him to do? Is that not what happened in that case?
That is the mechanism. The mechanism is that first you have a group that is being vilified, that is being described as dangerous, as insidious, as outsiders, and so forth, as inferior. The second is that you're given license by some authority. Now, it can be rhetorical license, such as you have a president who says these people are all rapists, but doesn't actually yet have a policy of doing that. He's just spouting that kind of rhetoric, right?
Right.
And some people in society then, especially in a society that has so many guns, will then draw the conclusions and do the work that they think is expected of them, that they're being called upon to do.
Well, that's the difference between, and maybe there's are terms for these, but that's the difference between sort of a homegrown genocide and intrinsic genocide and endogenous rather than exogenous. You know, it's being caused from within by the people, as opposed to like the Nazi genocide that was being driven from the government down. It was this, like you said, a machine.
Yes, although, you know, mostly genocide, even if you look at how it's defined, genocide is not that a lot of people start behaving aggressively against another group. That can cause massacres, mayhem, and so forth. Genocide is state organized.
Uh-huh.
And so what would make, say, God forbid, but what would change the situation that we saw now recently in the United States into genocide would be if the federal government decided that its policy was to do exactly what this man was doing. What you saw in Eastern Europe was that there was all this kind of pent-up violence, and then a regime comes in and says, actually, that group has to be wiped out. And there are already groups on the ground, nationalist groups, who would like to do that, but were unable to do it until now. And so that regime that comes in then recruits those groups that had wanted to get rid of that particular ethnic group, and they use them and their own forces, and they provide license to clear up that area of that group that they dislike.
Yeah, it's remarkable. Dr. Omar Bartov, can you stick around for a little bit?
Sure.
Great, thank you very much. We're gonna take a break here. We will be back with Dr. Bartov. His new book is called Anatomy of a Genocide, and it's about the life and death of one particular town in what is now Ukraine, used to be Poland at the time, and it's just a remarkable look at this issue. We'll continue this conversation. I want to get into the difference between war and genocide in just a minute.
This is the Thom Hartmann Program.
Dr. Bartov's book is Anatomy of a Genocide. And Dr. Bartov, what you were saying that the genocides are government organized. My recollection is that the Rwandan genocide was actually promoted and some would say caused by talk radio hosts.
Yes, it was indeed, and it's in fact one of the only cases where a radio host was accused of genocide, although he did not personally kill anyone. He just called for getting rid of the so-called cockroaches.
Mm-hmm. Was he literally encouraging murder, or was he just engaging in rhetorical excess that people?
Oh, no. He was engaged in calling for murder, and the radio was actually identifying where Tutsi might be found or were hiding, and was calling on the population to go and get them. But still, the genocide in Rwanda is state-organized. It is organized by the Hutu state. And it's, in fact, very, very hard to find certainly modern genocides that are not state-organized. That is what makes them into a genocide and differentiates them from, ethnic riots, which we've seen in many other places, or even pogroms. The sort of originator of mass violence against Jews was not state-organized. It was much more local violence.
We've had ethnic riots in the United States. I mean, we had there in New York City. There were riots against Italians. In Boston, there were riots against Irish people. There's a long and obviously 400 years of violence against African Americans. Right. How is it that we can have ethnic violence in the United States and not have it become more generalized? What is the regulator? What is the stabilizer that when it pops up, closes it back down again?
Well, this of course you can find many other examples for that. This does depend, as you said. I mean, one cause is that you other a group, that you say about a group that it's not human, that it doesn't belong. Right. And that you can do rhetorically, and that has happened very often in the United States, of course, as in many other countries. It's a bit different in the United States because it's a country of immigration, whereas the European countries nation states, so it's easier to identify who is in and who is out. But the other element that you need is for the state to, instead of enforce order, to use its police enforcement, its powers of enforcement to prevent chaos on the streets, is to convert those forces of enforcement and to convert the law into one that allows it, that makes it legal. So you can see an example of that when you think about what happens in Germany after World War II, when there are trials against Nazis. And I talk about that in the book. It was very hard to find people who participated in the genocide of the Jews guilty of murder. Because they were following orders. And although it was recognized that these orders were not legal, they had to actually be found guilty of having done something that was outside of the order, not mass killings, but killings on their own initiative.
Remarkable. Stick around. We'll be right back. Dr. Omer Bartov is with us, and we'll be right back in just a second. So we're talking with Dr. Omar Bartov, his new book, Anatomy of a Genocide. He's a distinguished professor of European history and professor of German studies at Brown University. Just this remarkable conversation. We were talking about how we've had ethnic riots in the United States, but they haven't turned into genocide, and they've been kind of recalibrated, well, what's the word? We've stepped back from that precipice by recognizing the essential humanity of our fellow people over time as culture changes. The old signs, no Irish or dogs allowed, that kind of thing. Those kinds of things changed. But I think, Dr. Bartov, there are a lot of African Americans who would tell you that their experience of this moment, given the levels of police violence in this country, given the levels of imprisonment, given how substantially shorter black lifespans are in the United States and how substantially poorer on average black families are in the United States, have been on the receiving end of hundreds of years of a slow-moving kind of partial genocide. Is that parallel to, have I gone over the edge with that parallel?
Well, I'll tell you, I actually spoke about my book at a community college in Brooklyn, and I talked about the fact that what makes for genocide is the second element that makes for genocide is that the enforcement powers and the law are turned upside down. The law that should protect you is now against you. That the same laws that you thought enabled you to be protected from violence are actually turned against you. This is what happened, of course, in Nazi Germany against Jews and so forth.
But right now, the seventh leading cause of death for black men in the United States is being killed by the police.
Right, and so I was saying that to that group, and I said, what happens is the police, you say, here's something on the street in the middle of the night, you call the police and you say, listen, there's something going on. The police arrives and they arrest you. Mm. And when I was saying that to that group, there were a lot of African Americans there and immigrants in my audience, and they said, well, this is what we feel.
Yeah.
And that's exactly the thing. Now, I would not say that we are seeing a genocide in that sense. I think that the one genocide in American history that is debatable is certainly of Native Americans.
Yes.
But I would say that there is growing and repeated racism and use precisely of the powers of enforcement and of the law against groups in this society, and particularly against African Americans and increasingly against immigrants.
I get it. We just have 30 seconds, so we're going to hit a hard break and have to wrap this up. Do you think that genocide is possible in the United States?
Yes.
What would it take?
It would take a government that would be willing to, and a Congress that would be willing to pass laws that would make that possible. Once you do that, persuading a population, as we've seen since the last election, in things that we did not believe would be possible in the 21st century, is not that difficult.
Remarkable. Dr. Omar Bartov is the author. The book is Anatomy of a Genocide. Sir, thank you so much for joining us today.
Thank you very much.
It's been a fascinating and a little shocking conversation. He's at Brown University, brown.edu, but the book is Anatomy of a Genocide. It's really worth checking out. We'll be back.
You're listening to the Thom Hartmann Program. Call 202-808-9925.
We'll be back with more of the news of the day right after this. Stick around. It's 27 minutes, coming up on 28 minutes past the hour. It's the Thom Hartmann University Book Club. Today we're reading from The Undercommons, Fugitive Planning and Black Study by Stefano Harney and Fred Moten. This is from the introduction. It starts with love, exchange, fellowship. It ends as it begins, in motion, in between various modes of being and belonging, and on the way to new economies of giving, taking, being with and for. And it ends with a ride in a Buick Skylark on a way to another place altogether. Surprising, perhaps, after we have engaged dispossession, debt, dislocation, and violence, but not surprising when you have understood that the projects of fugitive planning and black study are mostly about reaching out to find connection. They're about making common cause with the brokenness of being. A brokenness, I would venture to say, that is also blackness, that remains blackness, and will, despite all, remain broken because this book is not a prescription for repair. If we do not seek to fix what has been broken, then what? How do we resolve to live with brokenness, with being broke, which is also what Moten and Harney called debt? Well, given that debt is sometimes a history of giving, at other times a history of taking, at all times a history of capitalism, and given that debt also signifies a promise of ownership but never delivers on that promise, we have to understand that debt is something that cannot be paid off. Debt, as Harney puts it, presumes a kind of individualized realization to a naturalized economy that is predicated upon exploitation. Can we have, he asks, another sense of what is owed that does not presume a nexus of activities like recognition and acknowledgement, payment and gratitude? Can debt become a principle of elaboration? Moten links economic debt to the brokenness of being in the interview with Stefan Shukatis, who he acknowledges that some debts should be paid and that much is owed, especially to black people, by white people. And yet he says, I also know that it is, that what it is that is supposed to be repaired is irreparable. It can't be repaired. The only thing we can do is tear this stuff down completely and build something new, end of quote. The undercommons do not come to pay their debts, to repair what has been broken, to fix what has been undone. If you want to know what the undercommons wants, what Moten and Harney want, what black people, indigenous people, queers, and poor people want, what the we who cohabit in the space of the undercommons want, it is this. We cannot be satisfied with the recognition and acknowledgement generated by the very system that denies A, that anything was ever broken, and B, that we deserve to be the broken part. So we refuse to ask for recognition, and instead we want to take apart, dismantle, tear down that structure right now. That right now limits our ability to find each other, to see beyond it, and to access the places that we know live outside its walls. We cannot say what new structures will replace the ones we live with yet, because once we have torn stuff down, we will inevitably see more and see differently and feel a new sense of wanting and being and becoming. What we want after the break will be different from what we think we want before the break, and both are necessarily different from the desires that issue from being in the dark. Let's come at this by another path. In the melancholic and visionary 2009 film version of Maurice Sendak's Where the Wild Things Are, 1963, Max, the small seeker who leaves his room, his home, his family to find the world beyond, finds a world of lost and lonely beasts, and they promptly make him their king. Max is the first king the wild things have had, whom they did not eat, and who did not, in turn, try to eat them. And the beasts are the first grown things that Max has met, who want his opinion, his judgment, and his rule. Max's power is that he is small while they are big. He promises the beasts that he has no plans to eat them, and that this is more than anyone has ever promised them. He promises them that he will find ways through and around and will slip through the cracks and re-crack the cracks if they fill up. He promises to keep sadness at bay and to make the world with the wild creatures that roared their terrible roars and gnashed their terrible teeth and rolled their terrible eyes and showed their terrible claws. That Max fails to make the wild things happy or to save them or to make the world with them is less important than the fact that he found them and he recognized in them the end of something and potentially the path to an alternative in his world, or an alternative to his world, The wild things were not the utopian creatures of fairy tales. They were the rejected and lost subjects of the world Max had left behind. And because he shuttles between the Oedipal land where his mother rules and the ruined world of the wild, he knows the parameters of the real. He sees what is included and what is left out. And he is now able to set sail for another place, a place that is neither the home he left nor the home to which he wants to return. Moten and Harney want to gesture to another place, a wild place that is not simply the leftover space that limbs real and regulated zones of polite society. Rather, it is a wild place that continuously produces its own unregulated wilderness. The zone we enter through Moten and Harney is ongoing and exists in the present, and as Harney puts it, some kind of demand is already being enacted, fulfilled in the call itself. While describing the riots of London in 2011, Harney suggests that the riots and insurrections do not separate out the request, the demand, and the call. Rather, they enact the one in the other. The book is The Undercommons, Fugitive Planning and Black Study. Welcome back. Thom Hartmann here with you. It's 34 minutes past the hour. I'm working on a book right now. By the way, my book on the Supreme Court, The Hidden History of the Supreme Court and the Betrayal of America, is not yet in the stores, but will be shortly. Well, I got my, in fact, we got a case of early copies, so I know that they're being shipped to stores and being shipped to Amazon right now, but I think the release date is next week. I could be wrong, but it's coming up soon. So, I'm doing this series of small books. These are all 30,000-word books, 195-page books, and they're just 5 by 7 inches. So they're books that are designed to be, that you can read in a weekend, or you could read, if you're a fast reader, even in one day, and taking comprehensive information. The first one was on guns. The second one is on the Supreme Court and how they've, taken so much power that was never intended for them. The third one, which will be out next spring, is about voting and the Republican war on voting. And then the fourth one, which I'm writing right now, is going to be coming out right after the election, or actually after the inauguration of the new president in 2021, in the spring of 2021. And it's on monopolies. And, I've been up to my eyeballs in this monopoly stuff now for about 3 or 4 months, doing the research on this, reading books that other people have written, reading research papers, going back through the history of it. It's pretty shocking stuff, what I've learned. And one of the main things that I've learned is that we basically no longer have free enterprise in the United States. We don't have the kind of capitalism that Adam Smith talked about. What we have instead, October 1st is the release date. Thank you for that, Louise. But I'm guessing it'll probably ship just a little before that. So anyhow, it's going to be out in 4 weeks. This new book on the Supreme Court. You could of course, pre-order it, he says, as he shamelessly plugs his book. But in any case, actually, I think it's a really good book. I think you're going to want to read it. But where I'm going with all this is that in the United States now, every industry, literally every industry of any consequence at all, whether it's airlines, whether it's cruise ships, whether it's internet service, whether it's cable service, whether it's pharmaceuticals, whether it's health insurance, whether it's, just fill in the blank, right? Hotels, restaurant chains, retail stores, you name it. In every single industry, massive consolidation has happened since 1981 when Ronald Reagan stopped enforcing the Sherman Antitrust Act. And no president, Democratic or Republican, has begun enforcing that law and prevented these giant mergers, or even gone as far as Teddy Roosevelt and William Howard Taft did, two Republican presidents, in ordering the breakup of these companies. And by the way, Richard Nixon was the other one. Nixon ordered the breakup of AT&T. It happened during Jimmy Carter's presidency because this, it's a long process to break up a company. But if you own stock in AT&T, before it got broken up into 6 Bell companies and then Bell Labs, which became Lucent Technologies, if you own stock in AT&T before the breakup, and after the breakup you ended up with stock in 7 different companies, which is how it worked, you actually saw the value of your stock go up substantially. Because when these companies started competing with each other, there was just this explosion of innovation and an improvement in quality of service and all these kind of things. And the reason I'm telling you about this is this experience that we're having with our phone system right now. We get our phone service through Comcast. And the reason that we've had our phone service up till now through Comcast is because they're basically the only game in town. If you want to have telephone service where we have our studio here in Portland, Oregon, and this is true of large parts of Oregon, of Portland, and it's true of most of the United States. you only have one or two companies to choose from. Now, we've finally found a different internet provider, and we've made that switch. And now we've found a different phone provider, and we're going to be making that switch, but it's over the internet. It's VoIP phones, and which is also what Comcast is giving us. But Comcast is one of these giant dynastic companies. And because they're so large, and because, up until very, very recently, they are literally the only choice you have in some parts of town, they basically don't give a rat's ass about customer service. Louise was on the phone for an hour on Friday with Comcast, and they were saying, "Oh well, our service is showing that caller ID or call waiting rather is turned off." This is the beeps that you hear. We have 10 lines, and when all 10 lines are full, when the 11th person calls in, we get that call waiting beep that you get at home when you're on the phone and somebody tries to call you. And it's not supposed to happen. And I'm pretty sure I know why. I'm pretty sure it's the modem equipment that we've got in the back room. They have batteries in them. I mean, that hold in memory, that hold the configuration set up for the system. And 2 years ago, we had the exact same problem, and a service guy came out after many calls and 3 or 4 days of harassing Comcast, both on the telephone and on the air. And finally, a service guy came out and said, "Oh, well, the battery is dead in these things, and you need to replace, I need to replace the unit and take it back to the studio or take it back to the office and replace the battery in it." Why they're using old technology like that depends on batteries that has to be replaced every couple of years is real simple. Comcast can get away with it because they don't have competition. And this is the shocking thing, right? So Louise called them on Friday, and they said, "Oh, we got it all solved, and all you have to do is just unplug and replug your modems every morning, your telephone system." So we did that this morning. I did that, myself, actually, during the first break, and the problem was still there. So I'm convinced that the battery in the unit has died, and so Louise called Comcast today and tried to explain this to the person on the phone. Now, this is business service, for which we're paying over $600 a month. And she called up and said, "I'm a business customer. We've been with you for years, and we need somebody out here right away." And the woman was like, "We don't do that. If your phones are dead, we can send somebody out right away. But your phone isn't dead. You're just having a problem with it, so you're going to have to wait." And Louise is like, "This is a national radio show, and it sounds like crap. And you can't do. You've got to send somebody out." And this woman is like, "Nope, not going to happen. That's not our policy." And Louise is like, "But we're a business customer. We're spending, thousands of dollars a year with you guys." And nope, not going to happen. And so Louise was like, "Well, let me talk to one of your supervisors." And so she got a supervisor, and the supervisor said, "Well, maybe we can get somebody out there within 4 hours." Now, why would Comcast have such crappy service? And they're famous for it, right? They're notorious for it because they don't have competition. It's the same reason why they can charge as much as they do for internet service. In Europe, you can get internet service for $30, $40 a month. In the United States, good luck finding high-quality, high-speed internet service. I'm talking literally. In France, you can get, for $25 a month, you can get 100 MIP up and down internet service. In the United States, no. Why? Because in France, there's over 200 different companies you can choose from. In the United States, typically you have one choice. And again, this goes back to Reagan ending the enforcement of the Sherman Antitrust Act. And it's just this is where we're at, and I think it's a terrible thing. And you're listening to it or watching it being played out right in front of your eyes. In the case of this god awful service from Comcast, and like I said, I literally yesterday I signed the contract with a new phone company, and we're going to be transferring our phone system over and get rid of Comcast. Thank God, ding dong, the witch is dead. But it's going to probably take a week or two. But so anyhow, end of rant. I really think it's important that we seriously consider breaking up. I mean, in fact, I know that Elizabeth Warren and Bernie Sanders have both talked about this on multiple occasions. That we return to these values that Teddy Roosevelt and William Howard Taft and Franklin Roosevelt and for that matter, Harry Truman and Dwight Eisenhower and Richard Nixon held, right? Again, Nixon, I believe it was Nixon who started the breakup of AT&T. So, this is where we need to go. John in Minneapolis. Hey, John, what's on your mind today?
Yeah, I had read that Tom Perez is trying to prevent a focused debate on the Green New Deal. And I think that is really against, I would say, most of the members of the Democratic Party, of which I'm one of them. And I think if Keith Ellison, I think he should have been actually the chair, but they manipulated so that Tom Perez became president by manipulating votes from the DNC through Puerto Rico. Mm-hmm. And I think that people should look on Democracy Now! And see their, report on that by Ryan.
I get it, and I'm familiar with that, John. And it is pretty. I mean, that's power politics, right? That's people.
Yeah, it is.
But the one thing you probably don't know, John, and forgive my interrupting, but I got 40 seconds here.
Oh, sure.
Judd Legum has a newsletter. Popular.info is the website. You can sign up for it. His newsletter this morning was about how there are a bunch of people in the DNC are actually also lobbyists for fossil fuel companies.
Yeah, and
they're the ones who blew up the vote, not
Yep.
Tom Perez. They're the ones who voted against having a climate change debate.
Well, whoever
and
did.
Judd calls them out, names them.
Oh, good, because that's great. I want to know who they are.
Yeah, so you can read about it at popular.info. I believe it's Popular. I should double check before I screw it up and give people the wrong information. In fact, I've got it printed out here someplace. But anyhow, that's I had it. Hang on just a second. Yeah, Popular Information is the website. And
Okay.
Popular.info is the website. I got it. John, thank you for the call.
You're welcome.
Yeah, always good talking with you. We'll be back in just a minute. Stick around. We're going to check in with Talk Media News and find out what's going on in the world today. It's 45 minutes past the hour.
You're listening to Thom Hartmann. Visit thomhartmann.com for audio and video archives.
In 4 minutes, Bob Ney will be with us with an update on the news. Stick around. Sure I know what's wrong with the system, so have a seat or be in the back. Welcome back. And the Comcast guy just showed up. Isn't that good news? So anyhow, let's pick up some phone calls here. Dave in Federal Way, Washington. Hey, Dave, what's on your mind?
Hey, not too much, Tom. Hey, I wanted to make a comment in reference to the genocide conversation and your guest.
Right.
Just something to consider, because I noticed a couple of months ago, a lot of Trump supporters that I dialogue with, they're kind of changing their tact on me. They're saying, stop complaining because, you got a job, don't you, Dave? And also, there could be someone way worse than Trump come into office. Well, I started analyzing that, all right? And if you go back and look, and first I should say the philosopher Hannah Arendt, she said that America had like a firewall, and she survived the Holocaust, for crying out loud.
Right.
She said that America, basically our leaders act on concepts that other leaders around the world don't act on, and that's our firewall against totalitarianism. But I humbly disagree with that, because if you start looking at like Karl Lueger and the mayor of Vienna and his influence on Adolf Hitler, you do start to see a scenario like, for instance, if America did enter into a war that we thought was easy, like, for instance, Iran, and it turned out to not be easy, and we could, and all of Donald Trump's philosophies are sort of validated, like Karl Lueger's was, his philosophies against Jews and other, non-Germans, that all got validated in Hitler's mind. All right, and Hitler just applied it on the national and international scale.
Yeah, but I don't think Donald Trump is Adolf Hitler, Dave. That's.
No, but Adolf Hitler, I'm saying he's more like Karl Lueger, the mayor of Vienna. And
well, the mayor of, if my recollection, this was from The Rise and Fall of the Third Reich, right? From that book, the story of, was this when Hitler was living in Vienna, when he was an artist?
Yeah. Karl Lueger was Karl Lueger, I believe he died before Hitler even came to power. But he introduced into Austria in Vienna anyways. Vienna, very powerful. He was a very powerful mayor.
Right.
He introduced this concept of, look, you're the reason why it's so difficult to live in Austria is not because of any of these, fancy socio-political things. It's because of these Jews.
Right. He was saying the Jews are stealing all the money, blah, 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 all those god-awful stereotypes. Stereotypes is not even a good, strong enough word.
And that was influential on Hitler. Right? That was influential. And then it would seem that over time, Hitler, it was a self-validating. It just kept, that bias, that prejudice,
right,
continued to be validated in Hitler's mind until it eventually escalated into, the classical scapegoating. And what I'm saying is Donald Trump, what I'm simply sort of agreeing with are Trump supporters that say, look, there could be somebody much worse. All right, and I do believe that is remotely possible, and I also don't believe that the safeguards Hannah Arendt said that are in America are actually there. I don't think we actually have them.
Yeah. Well, let's hope you're wrong, Dave. Let's hope you're wrong. Dave, thanks a lot for the call. We'll be back. We're going to check in with former Congressman Bob Ney with the news of the day. Stick around. We'll be right back. Every day here on the Thom Hartmann Program, Louise and I and our team, Sean, Nate, Shira, Dave, Chase, Sue, Nigel, Ron, we all work to put together the very, very best show we possibly can. And there's an enormous amount of work that goes into the show. And one of the things that comes out of that is a lot of content, a lot of specific information that we go through and we dig out and, we want to share with you. And Sue puts that into our newsletter every week. And I think you will, if you don't already receive our newsletter, it comes in email every day, about an hour after we're off the air, or maybe a couple hours after we're off the air. And Sue goes through and pulls literally every link to every story that we talked about and puts it into the newsletter. It's free. We don't sell the list or anything. Complete safety and security. There's no charge. There's no nothing. Just, plug in your email address over at thomhartmann.com. And you get signed up for the newsletter. It's all fairly obvious. You'll see it on the website. So check it out, thomhartmann.com. Thank you.
Want to connect with the show online? You can find the Thom Hartmann Program on Facebook, Twitter, and Instagram.
So let's check in with Talk Media News and find out what's going on in the world today. This report brought to you by goatsfortheoldgoat.com and Loving What You Do. Alan Ratner's new book on the line with us. Former Ohio Congressman Bob Ney and author of Sideswiped, the story of how D.C. really works. Hey, Bob, what's going on in the world today?
Hello, Tom. Well, I wanted to go over in a part of the world for the G7. Now, there were several things, but there's something I think really big that came out of here that was unplanned. But the first, common information that's coming out of there was that President Trump has said he believes China is sincere in wanting a new trade deal. Now we've been hearing China talk about having a, quote, calm type of situation now. And then French President Macron and Trump both agreed that Iran must never have nuclear arms, is what they said jointly together. And then the statement, I don't know if you've covered this yet, but President Trump claimed today that Russian President Vladimir Putin outsmarted, quote, President Obama when he annexed the Crimea in 2014, and that Russia was expelled from the G8 because Obama was upset at having been outmaneuvered.
Right, I saw that. I heard that.
Right.
And that doesn't comport with history.
Yeah, that's not even near history. So I just did want to mention that came out of there. And then President Trump is pushing for Russia to be allowed to rejoin the now G7 club and make it the G8 again. And then he also announced, the president did, that the summit next year's summit in America will, quote, probably be held in Miami at one of his golf resorts.
Right, the Doral. He did an ad for his own golf resort.
Yeah, right out front
on international
television. Front of the world.
Yeah.
But the big deal about this is that, and we're finding out more information than we had this morning when I put out the news, but the big deal is that Javad Zarif, who is the foreign minister of Iran who put together the deal on behalf of Iran with the nuclear deal with President Obama and the European nations and China and Russia. He put that deal together. And Zarif, who was secretly visited by Senator Rand Paul in July in New York at the residence of the Iranian ambassador, at that point in time, Rand Paul said, look, why don't you go to the Oval Office and meet with Trump, which didn't fly with the supreme leader in Iran. But within 2 weeks after that, then all of a sudden, the foreign minister, Zarif, was sanctioned personally by the United States. So, you look at one of it, Tom, and why did Trump agree to have Rand Paul request the meeting? Then why was Zarif sanctioned? Now Zarif shows up, the foreign minister, at the invitation of President Macron, and we now find out that President Trump knew Zarif was coming.
Right.
He knew that. At first, supposedly, he didn't.
So do we know for sure that Trump knew that Rand Paul was going to meet with him?
Oh, Trump approved it. Yeah, nobody's talking about. I can't believe this. Rand Paul has now admitted on the golf course. President Trump said, "Yeah, okay."
Huh.
Rand Paul turned to him and said, "How about I invite Javad Zarif, the foreign minister, to come to the Oval Office?" And President Trump said yes. So when Rand Paul met with Zarif in New York, friends of mine have confirmed this. Rand Paul then said, "I want to invite you to the Oval Office." President Trump knows.
And Zarif said sure, and then the White House said no.
And then when the White House was silent, the supreme leader in Iran said not at this time. And then within a couple of weeks, the United States personally sanctions Zarif.
So was the sanctions a punishment for not coming to the White House?
Well, here's what I think, and this is the rest of this story. I believe that the sanctions were instituted by John Bolton then, convincing the president he didn't come here, we need to sanction him. So not Trump himself, but Bolton.
Right.
Now Macron shows up here at the G7, Zarif, the foreign minister, shows up at the request of Macron. We find out within the last hour that President Trump knew, because supposedly he didn't. He knew Zarif was coming, and he didn't.
So is this Trump going around Bolton?
Yes. That's getting to the shocking point, because when Trump was, and think about the psyche of President Trump, when Trump was asked about this surprise visit of the foreign minister of Iran, you know what his comment was? I don't have a comment.
Right.
Tell me the last time you ever heard that said.
Yeah. That's what he initially said. Then he said, I was, Macron asked me if it was okay, and I said yes, and then Macron kind of said, no, I didn't ask his permission, and then
didn't ask you, right.
and then Trump came out and said I was informed, or words to that effect.
Right, and then now there's a back and forth. The president is saying yes. Now here's the other thing: the president doesn't. This is for a quote from Trump. He is not seeking regime change in Iran. He said this country's been through that many times. That's completely contrary to John Bolton. And on the heels of all of this, Israel has shot down a quote Iranian killer drone. It was based in Syria, and the reason that's significant. Israel rarely announces it shoots down anything.
Right.
And it did in this case, because what you're going to see now, I predict to you, you're going to see Netanyahu and you're going to see Bolton and a cast of other characters, the Dick Cheneys of the world, going absolutely crazy at the fact of Trump agreeing to even have Zarif at the conference. That's what you're going to see, trying to sabotage all of this.
Because these guys want a war with Iran.
Yeah. Oh, yes, absolutely. They want a war with Iran. And then here was the last statement the president made. Iran is not the same country it was 2.5 years ago, suggesting that now is less of a threat. Well, that's because of the Obama nuclear deal.
Yeah. Interesting.
Right.
Interesting. Well, if he can pull something out, even if it's just to satisfy his ego, I'm all in favor of it. If he can if he can bring peace.
Well, Bolton won't have it, so we'll see what happens.
Yeah, that's going to be interesting. Bob Nate. Thank you, Bob.
Yes, thank you.
You're listening to Thom Hartmann.
We say fight back!
book today for the Thom Hartmann Book Club is A Woman of No Importance, The Untold Story of the American Spy Who Helped Win World War II by Sonia Purnell. This is from the prologue. France was falling. Burned-out cars, once strapped high with treasured possessions, were nosed crazily into ditches. Their beloved cargoes of dolls, clocks, and mirrors lay smashed around them and along mile upon mile of unfriendly road. Their owners, young and old, sprawled across the hot dust and were groaning or already silent. Yet the hordes just kept streaming past them, a never-ending line of hunger and exhaustion, too fearful to stop for days on end. 10 million women, children, and old men were on the move, all fleeing Hitler's ranks, pouring across the border from the east and the north. Entire cities had uprooted themselves in a futile bid to escape the Nazi blitzkrieg that threatened to engulf them. The fevered talk was of German soldiers stripped to the waist in jubilation at the ease of their conquest. The air was thick with smoke and the stench of the dead. The babies had no milk, and the aged fell where they stood. The hordes drawing overladen old farm carts sagged and snarled in their sweat-drenched agony. The French heatwave of May 1940 was witness to this, the largest refugee exodus of all time. Day after day, a solitary moving vehicle weaved its way through the crowd with a striking young woman at the wheel. Private Virginia Hall often ran low on fuel and medicines, but still pressed on in her French Army ambulance toward the advancing enemy. She persevered even when the German Stukas came screaming down to drop 110-pound bombs onto the convoys all around her, torching the cars and cratering the roads. Even when fighter planes swept over the treetops to machine gun the ditches where women and children were trying to take cover from the carnage. Even though French soldiers were deserting their units, abandoning their weapons and running away, some in their tanks. Even when her left hip was shot with pain from continually pressing down on the clutch with her prosthetic foot. Now, at the age of 34, her mission marked the turning point after years of cruel rejection. For her own sake, as much as for the casualties she was picking up from the battlefields and ferrying to the hospital, she could not fail again. There were many reasons why she was willingly jeopardizing her life far from home in aid of a foreign country when millions of others were giving up. Perhaps foremost among them was that it had been so long since she had felt so thrillingly alive. Disgusted with the cowardice of the deserters, she could not understand why they would not continue the fight. But then she had little to lose. The French still remembered sacrificing a third of their young menfolk to the Great War, and a nation of widows and orphans were in no mood for more bloodshed. Virginia, though, intended to go on the road, wherever the battle took her. She was prepared to take whatever risks, face down any dangers. Total war against the Third Reich might perversely offer her one last hope of personal peace. Yet even this was as nothing compared with what was to come in a life that drew out into a Homeric tale of adventure, action, and seemingly unfathomable courage. Virginia Hall's service in the France of summer 1940 was merely an apprenticeship for a near-suicide mission against the tyranny of the Nazis and their puppeteers in France. She helped to pioneer a daredevil role in espionage, sabotage, and subversion behind enemy lines in an era when women barely featured in the prism of heroism, when their part in combat was confined to the supportive and the palliative, when they were just expected to look nice and act obedient and let the men do the heavy lifting, when disabled women or men were confined to staying at home and leading often narrow, unsatisfying lives. The fact that a young woman who had lost her leg in tragic circumstances broke through the tightest constrictions and overcame prejudice and even hostility to help the Allies win the Second World War is astonishing. That a female guerrilla leader of her stature remains so little known to this day is incredible. Yet that is perhaps how Virginia would have wanted it. She operated in the shadows, and that was where she was happiest, even to her closest allies in France. She seemed to have no home or family or regiment, merely a burning desire to defeat the Nazis. They knew neither her real name nor her nationality, nor how she had arrived in their midst. Constantly changing in looks and demeanor, surfacing without notice across whole swaths of France, only to disappear again as suddenly, she remained an enigma throughout the war, and in some ways after it, too. Even now, Tracing her story has involved 3 solid years of detective work, taking me from the National Archives in London, the Resistance Files in Lyon, and the parachute drop zones in the Haute-Loire, to the judicial dossiers of Paris and even the white marble corridors of CIA headquarters at Langley. My search led me through 9 levels of security clearance into the heart of today's world of American espionage. I have discussed the pressures of operating in enemy territory with a former member of Britain's special services and ex-intelligence officers from both sides of the Atlantic. I've tracked down files that were missing and discovered that others remain mysteriously lost or unaccounted for. I have spent days drawing diagrams matching dozens of code names with scores of her missions, months hunting for remaining extracts of these strange disappeared papers, years digging out forgotten documents and memoirs. The book A Woman of No Importance by Sonia Purnell. You know, every day here on the Thom Hartmann Program, Louise and I and our team, Sean, Nate, Shira, Dave, Chase, Sue, Nigel, Ron, we all work to put together the very, very best show we possibly can. And there's an enormous amount of work that goes into the show. And one of the things that comes out of that is a lot of content, a lot of specific information that we go through and we dig out and, we want to share with you. And Sue puts that into our newsletter every week. And I think you will, if you don't already receive our newsletter, it comes in email every day, about an hour after we're off the air, or maybe a couple hours after we're off the air. And Sue goes through and pulls literally every link to every story that we talked about and puts it into the newsletter. It's free. We don't sell the list or anything. You complete safety and security. There's no charge. There's no nothing. Just, plug in your email address over at thomhartmann.com. And you get signed up for the newsletter. It's all fairly obvious. You'll see it on the website. So check it out, thomhartmann.com. Thank you.
Want to connect with the show online? You can find the Thom Hartmann Program on Facebook, Twitter, and Instagram.
This is the Thom Hartmann Program.
And welcome back. Thom Hartmann here with you. Oh, I've got it, Nate. We're good. We had a caller a couple of months ago with just an absolutely amazing story. And it was such an amazing story. I wanted to get him back on. And I mean, he hasn't written a book or anything, but just had this extraordinary experience of moving to China to live the American dream. His name is Kurt Kelly. And Kurt has a Twitter handle over at Kurt Kelly, K-E-L-L-E-Y 11. And, you can tweet him and say hi, whatever. Kurt, welcome back.
How you doing, Tom?
Good. Set this up for us. You decided to move to China.
Yes. I met a woman in the summer of 16 during the presidential not debate. Well, yeah, debate, actually, the first presidential debate between Hillary and Bernie, and met Julia, who was a foreign person from Ukraine teaching English in China. And I met her there, and through the campaign, of course, I was deeply involved in that, but she moved back to China to teach English. And after the campaign ended, she offered me to go there, and I said, why not?
So you end up in China as a teacher of English as a second language. You don't speak Chinese, right?
No,
right.
A little bit. She does much better than I do.
Yeah. And what you discovered was, I mean, we read these things in the paper that say that the Chinese middle class is larger than the entire population of the United States. That, some 70% of Chinese now, of Chinese millennials, 70% of Chinese millennials now own their own homes.
Absolutely.
Whereas home ownership among millennials here in the United States is below 40%, I believe. I'm pulling these numbers out of memory. And what did you experience? What did you learn? What did you see when you were there?
Well, I knew the numbers of China before I went there. I knew their GDP. I knew how they're middle class. And yes, the nominal number is larger than the American population, but research data compared to on-the-ground data are sometimes different, but they weren't in this case. You can see it in the culture, you can see it in their spending habits, how much they're out and doing commerce.
Right.
It's much more vibrant than even here in New York City.
Right. So historically, we've defined the American dream as the life my dad had. You know, he worked in a tool and die shop for 40 years. He was able to retire with a pension. He was able to take a couple of weeks of vacation every year. He was able to buy a new car every 3 years. He he raised 4 kids and put them through school. He could buy his own home, which was fully paid off by the time he retired. The pension rolled over to my mom when my dad died. You know, that good, comfortable life with a single breadwinner working a 40-hour week, being able to not just have a decent life, but to have a really good and comfortable life, a safe life, to have savings, to plan for the future. You know, now today, about half of the American population literally cannot deal with a $400 emergency. So what did you? So the American dream has really slipped in the United States since the 1980s, since we left the economic policies of John Maynard Keynes and Franklin Roosevelt and adopted the economic policies of Milton Friedman, the Chicago School, what's sometimes referred to as neoliberal economics. And both Democrats and Republicans have been, you know, fine with this since 1980. And it's just eviscerated the American middle class. How did you find the American dream in China? What told you that the American dream now exists in China?
Well, when it comes, I'm a mathematical engineer person, so I like to put things down to an equation. And the American middle class, I've researched, and the equation basically is to qualify as middle class, you have to qualify for a few things. Number one, and most important, all your bills have to be paid and current, okay, 100% current. Then you have to be able to put 10% into savings. And then you have to, on top of all that, you have to have 30% of your expendable income. To where if you wanted to, you could burn it if you wanted to, or, you know, put it into saving or retirement. Then on top of all that, you need the time element, okay? If you work more than 45 hours a week, you're no longer middle class, you're working middle class. If you work above 50, 55, 60 hours a week, you can't even qualify for working middle class. Now you're just a time slave.
Right. So
it's an equation. And in China, I was able to fulfill the time part. Here in America, being a single man with no children and being a geotech engineer, I'm okay financially. But the time-wise, I'm a time slave working 70, 80, 90 hours a week.
Right, and we're seeing that, you know, if you look at household income from 1980 to today, it's up about 10%. But that's household income. That's, you know, mom, dad, and one of the kids. And back in 1980, we had an average of 1.3 people in the workforce from every household. And now it's slightly over 2, as I recall.
Exactly, 2.3, yes.
So tell me about your neighbor in China.
My neighbor, Rosaline, she met me in the hallway when she saw me, horribly excited. An American lives on her floor. We started talking. She learned I was an English teacher. She immediately told me, you'll be teaching my daughter now for private English lessons for 3 to 4 hours a week, sometimes all day on Saturday, for $40 an hour.
So she could afford to pay you $40 an hour to teach her daughter English. She owned her apartment?
Owned it. And I don't mean American-owned, like bank-owned. I mean owned. Matter of fact, a lot of Chinese own their first home outright, and they may mortgage their investment property. But she owned that. She owned a small SUV, and she was able to take her family down to Macau, China for a week, which is the Las Vegas of China in the south, for vacation.
So where did she work that she had a cool enough job that she could afford to buy an apartment in a fancy high-rise in Beijing and
well, not the fancy high-rise yet. This was my first apartment, but it was a nice apartment.
Nice apartment, okay. And you know, she had a car and she could take vacations and it was all paid off and everything. What was this incredible job that she had?
Well, she didn't tell me where she worked. I ran into her where she worked, down at the local mall next to my house, the Roosevelt Mall. Yes, the Roosevelt Mall. And she worked at McDonald's.
As the manager?
No, she just worked at McDonald's on the floor.
So she was ringing up burgers for a living.
Yes, because they make about 115 RMB an hour. I don't know the exchange rate today. I think the RMB's gone up actually. It's about $16.04.
So she was making,
right, and she made hobbies at home. But the fact is, she was able to live a life, and she didn't work as a slave. She worked and lived a decent little life.
Right. Now, the main story that we hear in American media is about, people at Foxconn who are trying to throw themselves off the roof of buildings because they're they're so horrified that they have to, they're basically slave labor. How does that story contrast with your next door neighbor who was working at McDonald's and living a middle class life?
Does that exist? Yes. That's all real and things like that. The Chinese do talk about that. When I'm overseas, I don't just talk about the nice things to do. I like to talk to the older people, understand how things have changed, and really get into the nuances of their culture.
Right.
So does that exist and has that existed? Yes, that is true. China does have their problems, but they're doing their best to grow a very vibrant middle class. There is a pretty decent disconnect between their middle class and their still working army poor.
Remarkable.
But the fact is they're able to create that to where we don't have a massive disconnect. Our middle class is really more debt slaves, and then the working poor is just true working poor.
When you moved to a nicer apartment building, did you encounter more similar stories to this? People who were just working average jobs, who were had the kind of life my dad had, the middle class life.
Right. Well, my next apartment was in Hengxi High, or in Kaifai Chu, and my neighbors literally drove Rolls Royces and GTRs and Bentleys and ZR1s. So those were the professionals. Those were the owner class. Things like that. My next door neighbor, who I became truly good friends with and still is, Whiskey, that's his call sign. He plays Call of Duty a lot. And he's a economics professor at the University of Dalian. So
now, a professor in the United States would not earn enough money to drive a Rolls Royce or a Bentley.
No, but he's married to a plastic surgeon.
I guess maybe a plastic surgeon could. Yeah.
Yeah.
So that was the upper middle class, but even the upper middle class in the United States typically, doesn't have Rolls Royces and Bentleys. I mean, they may have a Cadillac, but
there were plenty of Cadillacs too, right? But there were plenty of just very, very well-off people around me, and it was a beautiful apartment for $528 a month.
Wow.
Yeah. So I'm not saying America needs to lower their prices. We need to raise wages.
Yeah. Yeah, well, and lowering prices wouldn't be a bad thing. I mean, I was talking earlier about the cartelization of our economy, and it's very real, and right across the board. Kurt Kelly, CurtKelley, CurtKelley 11 is his Twitter handle. If you want to engage this conversation, Kurt, thanks a lot for dropping by.
Thank you.
Good talking with you, Kurt Kelly, our guest. We'll be right back at 16 minutes past the hour.
This is the Thom Hartmann Program.
We'll be back with more of the news of the day and your calls right after this. And welcome back, Elizabeth in Winter Spring, Florida. Hey, Elizabeth, what's on your mind today?
Hi. I wrote it down so I won't babble. I live right outside of Orlando, and I've been here my whole life, born and raised. I watch a lot of the international news as well as you and the various progressives. That helps really keep me on top of things. If MSNBC kind of softens stuff or says otherwise, they miss out on a lot of stuff, all of them. But I watch France 24 and DW, which is Dutch Well. But anyway, my boyfriend, he's a machinist. He actually works at a college. He's a Republican. He's 62. He's about 10 years older than I am. He's always voted Republican because his mentor in the machine shop had been Republican until 2018, and he voted Democratic for our state because he's hated Rick Scott. I mean, even Republicans hated Rick Scott. I don't know how he managed to get by, but he can't stand Trump anymore. He voted for him.
That's interesting.
And I thought, well, okay. He's not. The thing is he's not racist. He's really getting really pissed though for a long time at all the nasty stuff. But he just doesn't pay attention. He didn't pay attention, period. So he didn't even know what the birther thing was somehow.
Yeah, I think this is true of a lot of Americans. They kind of live in their own little bubbles, and they don't know what's going on in the world because they're so busy, just trying to make a living.
Working.
Kind of apropos of what we're just talking to Kurt Kelly about.
Right. Yeah. He's agnostic. He's not for guns at all. He's all for the banning. of them.
Yeah.
And he's all for higher wages and Medicare for all. So I just, he got the idea along, thanks to Fox, that, that they're for the working Americans. And it's obvious that, they're not for working people. So, I mean, he's not going to vote for him. So I just wanted that as some good news for people, that there are people that have came to their senses. He has for quite a while, and I think it helped that there's a guy that's been working with him for the last year who's just obnoxious and, thinks badly about people.
Elizabeth, I need to go to another caller, but thank you for the call.
I appreciate it.
Yeah, thank you for sharing that story.
To you. And
yeah,
thank
me too.
you for you.
Thank you. Thank you, Elizabeth. Good talking with you. Dahlia in Buena Park, California. Am I saying your name right? Dahlia? No, Dahlia. Okay, let's try Corky in Hilton, New York. Hey, Corky, what's on your mind?
I'm lost, Tom. I can't take it anymore. This guy is an ass clown. He doesn't deserve to be president.
Okay, what sets you off today, Corky?
Just the way he acts when he's with our allies over there at the summit.
Uh-huh. You're talking about the lies he was telling at the press conference?
Yeah. And the way he pushes
the press is pretty astonished by this. I was watching CNN, and one of the hosts was like, I can't believe, the president just lied to the entire world about why Putin's no longer part of Russia's no longer part of the G8. I mean,
he's got his own reality.
Yeah, apparently. Corky, thanks a lot for the call. It's good to hear from you. I appreciate it.
Bye.
Yeah, have a good one. We'll be back. It's 20 minutes past the hour here on the Thom Hartmann Program. Stick around. We'll be taking your calls afterwards. Every day here on the Thom Hartmann Program, Louise and I and our team, Sean, Nate, Shira, Dave, Chase, Sue, Nigel, Ron, we all work to put together the very, very best show we possibly can. And there's an enormous amount of work that goes into the show. And one of the things that comes out of that is a lot of content, a lot of specific information that we go through and we dig out and, we want to share with you. And Sue puts that into our newsletter every week. And I think you will, if you don't already receive our newsletter, it comes in email every day, about an hour after we're off the air, or maybe a couple hours after we're off the air. And Sue goes through and pulls literally every link to every story that we talked about and puts it into the newsletter. It's free. We don't sell a list or anything. You complete safety and security. There's no charge. There's no nothing. Just, plug in your email address over at thomhartmann.com. And you get signed up for the newsletter. It's all fairly obvious. You'll see it on the website. So check it out, thomhartmann.com. Thank you.
Want to connect with the show online? You can find the Thom Hartmann Program on Facebook, Twitter, and Instagram.
Welcome back. Thom Hartmann here with you. It's been a fascinating day. We've covered a lot of territory here, and there's a couple of things that I wanted to get to and get into this just general conversation with you about, and starting with the Amazon. I mean, this is pretty amazing. The Amazon is burning. The headline. This is literally a CNN headline. The Amazon is burning because the world eats too much meat. Too much meat? Yeah, it turns out that this is why the vast majority of the deforestation that's been happening in the Amazon for the last 50 years has been going on. And now Bolsonaro is speeding this process up. Keep in mind, the Amazon rainforest produces 20% of the planet's oxygen. Without oxygen, we don't do real well, right, as human beings. I mean, we can take a small reduction in oxygen levels, but not a whole bunch. So, well, here's what CNN says. So for those wondering how they could help save the rainforest, known as the planet's lungs, for producing about 20% of the world's oxygen, the answer may be simple. Eat less meat. Now, the finance minister of Finland actually called for this. Finland. He's asking the European Union to, quote, urgently review the possibility of banning Brazilian beef imports. It turns out that Brazil is the largest in the world, right? We've got a lot of cattle in the United States. I mean, there's more cows than there are people in the United States. And yet, Brazil is the largest exporter of beef in the world. In fact, they provide 20% of the entire planet's beef exports. This one country, Brazil. And you know, burning down the Amazon, what they do is they burn down the trees, burn out the forest, allow grass to regrow, and then they graze cattle on it. And this is premium beef because it's, quote, grass-fed. You can get a lot higher price for grass-fed beef, particularly in Japan, interestingly enough. So, you know, so this, you know, by the way, the principal export, 44% of Brazil's exports are going to China and Hong Kong, which, you know, kind of adds to the complexity of the issue. So we start out with this, okay, you know, Finland and CNN and the UN, you know, this most recent thing that came out of the IPCC are all pointing at beef, meat production in general, and beef in particular, as being a principal cause or principal source of greenhouse gases, both through deforestation and the intensive agricultural methods that produce enormous amounts of methane. Meanwhile, over in the New York Times, and this ties into the beef, more than this piece, the article by Darish Musarrafan and Dan Glickman, Our Food is Killing Too Many of Us. They say more than 100 million adults, almost half the entire adult population, have prediabetes or diabetes. Cardiovascular disease afflicts about 122 million people, causes 840,000 deaths every year. So this is, you know, heart and blood vessel disease is killing 2,300 Americans a day. 3 in 4 of us are overweight or obese. And they identified just 10 dietary factors that are estimated to cause over 1,000 deaths a day from heart disease, stroke, and diabetes alone. And at the top of this list, consuming meat. Cardiovascular disease costs us $351 billion a year in healthcare spending and lost productivity. Diabetes costs us $327 billion a year. The total cost of the obesity epidemic in the United States is estimated at $1.7 trillion a year. That's almost 10% of our entire GDP is going to deal with both the healthcare costs and the lost productivity costs associated with the obesity epidemic in the United States. And meanwhile, we learned this remarkable study from Scientific American. And I quote, "You would have to eat twice as much broccoli today to get the same nutrients as a generation ago." This is from the U.S. Department of Agriculture. Quote, "The level of every nutrient in almost every kind of food has fallen between 10 and 100% since 1975. An individual today would need to consume twice as much meat, 3 times as much fruit, and 4 to 5 times as many vegetables to obtain the same amount of minerals and trace elements available in those same foods in 1940. What's causing this? The use of what are called biocides, pesticides, antibiotics, fungicides, insecticides, has killed our soil microorganisms. And thus, as a consequence, our soil is dead, and those microorganisms help plants absorb these minerals. It's crazy. We'll be
You're listening to the Thom Hartmann Program. Call 202-808-9925.
Be right back with Tom Steyer. Stick around.
Want to connect with the show online?
You know, every day here on the Thom Hartmann Program, Louise and I and our team, Sean, Nate, Shira, our book today in the Thom Hartmann Book Club is No Visible Bruises, What We Don't Know About Domestic Violence Can Kill Us by Rachel Louise Snyder. I'm reading from the preface. This is page 4. Suzanne and I exchanged small talk on her brother's driveway. that day in 2010. She and the family were still in preparation and packing mode for their annual camping vacation into the hinterlands of Maine. And Suzanne had been greeted by her brother Andre with a long shopping list. She had told me she worked for a domestic violence agency in town and that they had recently developed a new program that she was calling the Domestic Violence High Risk Team. Their primary aim was simple, she said. We try to predict domestic violence homicides before they happen so we can prevent them. It sounded immediately implausible. So implausible, in fact, that I thought I'd misheard some elemental piece of it. Predict, I remember saying? You said predict domestic violence homicides? I had come across domestic violence in my reporting over the years, not only in Cambodia, but also in places like Afghanistan, Niger, and Honduras. But it had never been a focus for me. Instead, it was always adjacent to whatever other story I was writing, so much so that it was practically banal. The young girls jailed for love crimes in Kabul, the Indian child brides who gave interviews only in front of the men who controlled them, the Tibetan women forcibly sterilized by the Chinese government, the teenage brides in Niger cast from their villages after post-pregnancy fistulas made them pariahs, the Romanian women forced to give to birth multiple children under Ceausescu and who now in their early 30s were grandmothers fated to poverty, the Cambodian street workers beaten and gang-raped for weekend sport by well-heeled Khmer teenagers. All of these women in every country were brutalized and controlled by men as a matter of routine. Men made the rules, primarily through physical violence. It was there, lurking in practically every story I'd ever covered around the world, a shadowy background so obvious I didn't even have to ask about it most of the time. It was as common as rain. Until that moment in the driveway with Suzanne Dubas, if I thought of domestic violence in the United States at all, I saw it as an unfortunate fate for the unlucky few, a matter of bad choices and cruel environments. A woman hardwired to be hurt, a man hardwired to hurt. But I never envisioned it as a social ill, an epidemic we can actually do something about. Now here was Susan Dubas talking about preventative measures for a type of violence that, for the first time, I saw operating along a continuum. The young girl in India married as a child, the Tibetan woman sterilized, the Afghan woman jailed, the housewife in Massachusetts brutalized by her husband. They all shared a common privation, what domestic violence victims across the world lacked, agency in their own lives. The forces that brought a Cambodian prostitute to the brink of death were the same forces that killed thousands of women and children and men, but mostly women and children, across America and the entire globe every year. On average, in fact, an average, in fact, of 137 women each and every day are killed by intimate partner or familial violence across the globe. And this does not include men or children. Everything in my body suddenly came alive that day. I saw all the faces of women around the world from over 2 decades of work, and I realized how rarely I'd gazed inward at my own country, at what we got wrong and what it meant. The universality of domestic violence and how it crisscrosses geographical, cultural, and linguistic barriers. Maybe all those other stories were in preparation for the day that I'd meet Paul Monson and look at the mountains from his living room windows. I ended up following Suzanne to the farmer's market and then to the grocery store and then to the liquor store as she prepped for her camping trip. I helped her carry ice and peaches and hamburger meat. I asked question after question while she drove and while her mother Pat sat in the passenger seat, chiming in here and there. How did it work? How many have you stopped? What else can you predict? My questions were vast and endless. Like many people who hold a casual acquaintance with a problem, I believed all the common assumptions. That if things were bad enough, victims would just leave. That restraining orders solved the problem. And that if a victim didn't show up to renew a restraining order, the problem had been solved. That going to a shelter was an adequate response for victims and their children. That violence inside the home was something private, unrelated to other forms of violence, perhaps most notably mass shootings. That a lack of visible injury signaled a lack of seriousness. And perhaps most of all, that unless we stand at the receiving end of a punch, such violence had nothing to do with us at all. Over the next few years, Suzanne Dubas and her colleague Kelly Dunn patiently taught me about the scope and history of an issue that still today is too often hidden. I learned why past approaches had failed and what we could do more effectively today. Between 2000 and 2006, 3,200 American soldiers were killed. During that same period, domestic homicide in the United States claimed 10,600 lives. This figure is likely an underestimate as it was pulled from the FBI's supplementary homicide reports, which gather data from local police departments, and participation is voluntary. 20 people in the United States are assaulted every minute by their partners. Former UN Secretary General Kofi Annan called violence against women and girls the most shameful human rights violation. And the World Health Organization called it a global health problem of epidemic proportions. A study put out by the United Nations Office on Drugs and Crime cited 50,000 women around the world were killed by partners or family members in 2017 alone. 50,000 women. The UNODC report called Home the most dangerous place for women. The book No Visible Bruises by Rachel Louise Snyder. Welcome back. On the line with us is Thom Steyer, the philanthropist, Next Gen America, a nonprofit group that combats climate change, the Democratic candidate for president in 2020. His website, ThomSteyer, STEYER.com, if you're not familiar with him, which would be surprising. And his Twitter handle, of course, is @ThomSteyer. Thom, welcome to the program.
Thanks for having me, Tom.
Tom?
Can you hear me?
Huh. I do.
Hello. Can you? I
I'm
can
not
hear
hearing
you,
him.
Tom. Can you hear me?
You can hear him? Why can't I?
Keep going.
Okay, but if I can't hear him, then our nonprofits are not hearing him either, Sean.
We're hearing him.
You are. I am totally confused by this. Well, Tom, while we're trying to figure this out, Sean, maybe you can pot your speakers up over there so that I can hear him. Tom, tell us what provoked you to run for president?
Tom, I was listening to the debates, and I was terrified that the country wasn't going to come to grips in a real way with the problems that are in front of us. That we were going to have a series of important and fascinating policy debates about health care and about the Green New Deal, about immigration, about things that are absolutely critical, about gun violence, but that in fact we weren't going to deal with the issue in America, which is
Nate,
the
I'm
corporate
hearing
takeover
myself.
of our
I can't.
government. Can you hear me now?
Oh, this is so frustrating.
You cannot hear him. You can't. I can.
Yeah, I can't hear him.
Let me try something here. Hang on.
Okay.
Go.
One.
Ask him if you can hear him now. See if you
Tom, can you hear me?
I can hear you perfectly.
I'm sorry. I'm.
Try this. Here. Go.
Tom Steyer?
Can you hear me?
Now I can hear you. Holy cow. Sean had to hit the magic button on the board there. I am so sorry. It's just been one of those crazy days. Our phone company has been here and everything else. So you were saying the reason that you're running for president is, if you don't mind recapping.
I was worried that we were not going to. I listened to the debates and I thought they were turning into policy discussions that were absolutely important, but that we weren't dealing with step one, which is how are any of them going to get enacted as long as we've had a hostile corporate takeover of our government. We have a failed national government. And until we restore our democracy, until we get back to government of, by, and for the people, none of those incredibly important policies that the American people are demanding is going to happen. And I felt as if I didn't get into this debate, we weren't going to deal with how we were going to get things done. We were going to talk about what we wanted and the different nuances of healthcare and of immigration and of gun violence and of the Green New Deal. But we weren't going to deal with the issue, which is how do we get any of this done in a broken federal government.
Doesn't this all go back to 1976 to the Buckley versus Vallejo decision, when for the very first time in the history of the United States, the Supreme Court ruled that money was the same thing as speech, and that billionaires could essentially own politicians. Well, not even multimillionaires could own politicians, and then 2 years later in First National Bank versus Bilotti, they extended that to corporations.
Well, Tom, it does go back to that, and it really is a corporate question. For the last 10 years, I've been organizing coalitions of ordinary American citizens to take on corporations at the ballot box, and also organizing Americans to be registered, to be engaged politically, and to turn up at the ballot, to vote. And for 10 years, we've been beating corporations. For 10 years, we've been taking on oil companies and utilities and tobacco companies. I've closed $1 billion tax loophole for corporations and sent it to the public schools. So I know this can be done, but I think we need to call it out. I think we need somebody from the outside, somebody who's not part of the Washington establishment, somebody who can name this and call it out so we can break that corporate stranglehold and then get all the policies done that we all know we need.
Several of the more progressive candidates, and I think some of the ones who probably wouldn't even call themselves progressives, have been for some time calling for a constitutional amendment to basically roll back Citizens United, which is the full realization of the Buckley decision and the First National Bank decision, and McCutcheon as well. All of these decisions. It could be, theoretically, it could be done legislatively. The Article 3, Section 2 of the Constitution says that the Supreme Court shall operate under regulations and within the context of exceptions as defined by Congress. So Congress, it's called court stripping. Congress could literally pass a law saying the Supreme Court may not rule on this, and by the way, we're reversing Buckley. A. B, if we could get, two-thirds of the House and Senate and three-quarters of the states to go along with it, we could pass a constitutional amendment, although, it's pretty big lift. How else could that get done, in your opinion? You're talking about electing the right guy, presumably yourself. If you were president, what could you do outside of the political process that might bring this about?
Well, Tom, I think when we think about a critical issue like this, like the hostile corporate takeover of our government, the first thing is to name it and get a mandate to change it. So this election, that's why I felt I should run, is I feel like you have to name the problem so that Americans can hear what it is that you think is critical to changing the country and their lives for the better. So the first thing is to run on it and to get a broad, sweeping mandate that this is what's wrong. The second thing is, of course, we want to get rid of Citizens United. But I've also talked about putting in term limits for Congress of 12 years for Congress people and senators. I've talked about a national referendum that if Congress won't act on something like gun violence, that you can put it directly to the people, where over 90% of Americans want mandatory background checks on every gun sale. Of course, we're interested in getting the Americans the ability to vote easily and in broader numbers. But I think the other thing that's true is you can use the power of the presidency with what's already there. On day one, you can start to reform and make the Federal Election Commission have extreme, radical transparency for money gifts and change the kinds of fines. In 2018, the total amount of fines from the FEC in the national election was $600,000. That's just completely off the charts. That means that if you do break the law in elections, if you do hide the source of the money, if you do in fact use so-called dark money, there's no cost to it.
Right, and we know that that's been done for some time,
in gigantic size.
Yeah.
So when we think about what's going on here, the first thing is to bring it up, but the second thing is to use the existing laws to, the kind of transparency that everybody knows where the money's coming from and they'll figure out why. We've seen that when people understand that there's millions of dollars coming from corporations in their self-interest, that money is worth much less.
Yeah.
And people understand they're just trying to buy the government, which is what they've effectively done.
Right, and it's an extraordinary return on investment, by the way. There was one study done last year that suggested that companies lobbying for tax cuts were getting something like a 400-to-1 return on their investment for just lobbying.
They got a $1.2 trillion tax cut from the Republicans and the Trump administration.
Right, and probably based on a couple $1 million worth of lobbying.
Whatever they've put in, that is a fantastic return.
Yeah. Now, go ahead.
If you look at the drug companies, I don't know what the drug companies have put in, but we pay double what everybody else pays for the exact same drugs, and they've made it illegal to go to Canada to buy the exact same drugs at half price. So who do you think wrote that law?
Yeah. It's fairly obvious. You mentioned essentially a national referendum, and you mentioned term limits. The term limits thing is challenging. I understand the desire to somehow get around the advantage of incumbency on the one hand. On the other hand, what we've seen in individual states that have instituted term limits is that, when a new person comes into Congress or state legislature, the first thing that they look for is somebody who can show them, teach them the ropes, show them how things work, to show them, tell them where the bodies are buried and how things get accomplished and, what the processes are. And in the states that have had fairly aggressive term limits, what we've seen is that permanent infrastructure, which used to be, the old farts, the people who had been in Congress or had, been there for 10, 20, 30 years, they would take these new people on and kind of mentor them, that they have been replaced essentially by lobbyists as the new permanent infrastructure in those states with term limits. How do you avoid that problem with the term limits that you're suggesting?
Well, I think that is the fine line you have to walk, Tom, is that you cannot make it too aggressive so that, in fact, people never get settled in. At the same time, you take away the idea of people who've just become fronts for corporations.
Yeah.
And so it is a fine line. I agree with you. That's a good point. But I do think what we're seeing in Congress is failure. I mean, if you just think about what a normal national legislature would deal with, certainly gun violence, where we have had more than one mass shooting for every day of the year, whereas, in fact, the next country with the most mass shootings is Mexico with 3.
Wow.
We're approaching 300.
Right.
The next most is 3. If you look at immigration, comprehensive immigration reform, you would think any country that had 11 to 13 million people living here without documentation would deal with that in a matter of years, or certainly not over decades. We can't even bring up the question. We are the only country in the world that is not dealing with climate at a national level. The list, we pay twice as much for health care as any other country in the world.
And we have lower incomes. I mean, we're 52 in the world in terms of life expectancy.
So, you're talking about, I said a broken government.
Yeah.
We are not doing, our national government is failing in front of our eyes.
And yet this was, a variation on that theme was essentially what Donald Trump ran on. And that tells me, and he's sitting in the White House right now. Yes, Hillary Clinton got 3 million more votes, but still, what that tells me is that there is a deep hunger in America for that kind of a message. The system is broken. It's broken in a way that was intentional. It was broken by very, very wealthy and powerful interests, and they're basically trying to screw the average working person to make themselves richer. In my language, not yours, but
Tom,
go ahead.
The key point in American politics is that 4 out of 5 Americans, so that goes across geography, it goes across party lines, it goes across ages. 4 out of 5 Americans believe corporations have bought the democracy.
Right.
And of course it explains Mr. Trump. Do you remember Drain the Swamp?
Yeah.
It turns out he was the biggest swamp rat ever.
Oh, yeah.
But his point resonated because people across the United States believe that corporations have bought the democracy. And he said, I'm going to fight for you. It turned out he was going to fight for the corporations harder than anybody else. But he claimed he was going to fight for them. The fact that he said something that Americans believe and got elected on it doesn't mean they were wrong just because he's been a terrible president.
Yeah.
In fact, every solution, his tax plan, supported corporations more than probably any other piece of legislation in the history of the United States.
Tom Steyer, we have to take a break. Do you want to stick around, or do you have to move along?
Let me stick around for a few more minutes, Tom. I love talking with you and your listeners.
Great. Thank you. Tom Steyer is with us, the philanthropist, Next Gen America, Democratic candidate for president 2020. Tom Steyer, STEYER.com is his website.
You're listening to Thom Hartmann. Visit ThomHartmann.com for audio and video archives.
We'll be back with Tom Steyer in just a moment. Stick around. And welcome back. And Tom, we have 4 minutes here without our commercial stations, but we're still on our nonprofit stations and on Free Speech TV. You said that you wanted to take the issue of corporate power and corporate governance, essentially, to the American people. That sounds like a national referendum. There is no national referendum in the Constitution. We have about half our states have the ability of individual people to put things on the ballot. You want to flesh that out a little?
Look, I think what we have in 26 states is when the legislature can't act, you can get a certain number of signatures, put a proposal on the ballot, and then have a vote. And if enough citizens vote for it, it becomes law. Mm-hmm. That's true in 26 states. To do that would take a ton of legislation and maybe a constitutional amendment. So it's also possible that we could do this in a way where we could have an actual vote, and we could do it, and it would be advisory, and you'd then be able to tell who voted and basically hold elected officials to account if they didn't follow the desires of their constituents. And the obvious example is mandatory background checks on guns, where over 90% of Americans want mandatory background checks on every gun purchase, but we don't have that, and it's really off the table again.
Yeah.
So the question is, how can you call yourself a representative of your constituents when you do the bidding of the gun manufacturers who give you money through the NRA instead of over 90% of your constituents? And in fact, the result of that is the murder of innocent Americans, including innocent American children. I mean, how could, if we could get that, not a poll, but a national vote to prove that, I think that would take us a step, although, of course, it's a million times better to get it put into law. But given the broken nature of our politics, we're gonna have to figure out as we go exactly what we can get and then push it further as we go along.
We had here in Washington State, or just north of us in Washington State, about 70% support for carbon tax. Jay Inslee got it on the ballot. I mean, it was a citizens' referendum, but it got on the ballot. And I live in Portland, and so we get Washington State, TV ads here because Vancouver's right across the river, and it's one of the larger cities in Washington State. And this former Republican AG, who never identified himself as a Republican but looked like Mr. Rogers, came on TV and said, this is going to cost $1 trillion or more. It's going to wipe you out. It's going to raise your taxes. It's a terrible, terrible idea. And that ad ran like 8 or 9 times a day, every single day, all the way up to the election, and that proposal went down in flames. This is the confluence of your suggestion that, citizens get involved and we have ballot initiatives, and, you're identifying the problem of corporate power and spending money in elections, is it not?
Yes, it is. But let me say this, Tom. I've done this. We've beaten the oil companies on this very issue with 70% of the vote. We've beaten the utilities. We've taken on the tobacco companies when they had won 17 times in a row, and we beat them. We have. You do have to be organized. You do have to be prepared. This is what I was saying. For 10 years, this is what I've been doing, is organizing coalitions of citizens to take on corporate power and at their own game and beat them. And that's what we've done.
I'd like to learn more about that. Can you stick around, right? We can finish this conversation. We'll have about 4 minutes here on the other side of this break. Great. Tom Steyer is with us. We'll be right back. Every day here on the Thom Hartmann Program, Louise and I and our team, Sean, Nate, Shira, Dave, Chase, Sue, Nigel, Ron, we all work to put together the very, very best show we possibly can. And there's an enormous amount of work that goes into the show. And one of the things that comes out of that is a lot of content, a lot of specific information that we go through and we dig out and, we want to share with you. And Sue puts that into our newsletter every week. And I think you will, if you don't already receive our newsletter, it comes in email every day, about an hour after we're off the air, or maybe a couple hours after we're off the air. And Sue goes through and pulls literally every link to every story that we talked about and puts it into the newsletter. It's free. We don't sell the list or anything. You complete safety and security. There's no charge. There's no nothing. Just, plug in your email address over at thomhartmann.com. And you get signed up for the newsletter. It's all fairly obvious. You'll see it on the website. So check it out, thomhartmann.com. Thank you.
Want to connect with the show online? You can find the Thom Hartmann Program on Facebook, Twitter, and Instagram.
Thom Hartmann here with you, and Tom Steyer's on the line with us. I was just reading a live ad on our commercial side. You were hearing on some sort of an announcement on the non-com side. Tom, we were talking just a moment ago, and you said that for the last decade, you have been successfully taking on corporate power. This is something I don't know a great deal about you. Tell us about this.
Well, I mean, it started literally 10 years ago when there was a ballot initiative put on by two oil companies to roll back the most progressive energy laws in the world, which are the California energy laws. Mm-hmm. And they had had a similar fight 4 years before where someone had taken them on, spent $72 million of his own dollars, and lost his money and lost his reputation and lost the ballot initiative. So no one really wanted to take them on. We did a completely different strategy. We started with the knowledge that we need a coalition that's grassroots oriented, that goes right to the communities, that starts with Latinos and African Americans and Asian Americans, that includes labor at its core. We got half the chambers of commerce in the state. We had a different message, which is this is something, the argument that you were describing with Jay Inslee in Washington, where it was basically jobs versus the environment, is a lie. We called that out day one. We said we have to win the economic argument.
Right. And by the way, if I may interrupt you,
create jobs, and we got 70% of the vote. Talking about clean air and jobs.
Yeah, and I just want to make clear, you're not saying that Jay Inslee was lying. What you're saying is that the guys who are opposing Jay Inslee's carbon tax are lying.
Completely.
Yeah.
I have a ton of respect for Governor Inslee.
Yeah.
I consider him a friend. I think he's wonderful. This is the key lie from the corporations, from the Republican Party, and from Mr. Trump, that it's a choice between a healthy environment and a healthy economy. And the truth is, the only choice is a healthy economy and a healthy environment. They are lying about it, and you have to call them out aggressively. I would have gone and taken them on directly. You can never let them get on a soapbox and lie unchallenged, because that's what they do.
Right.
And so it's very clear. Before you start, you know what they're going to say. What are you going to do about it?
Yeah, and you have a plan for this specifically.
Look, to me, oh my gosh, we know that we've done so many studies to prove that if we move to clean energy, it will create millions of net jobs. It will create lower cost energy. Clean energy is already lower cost. It will clean up the air and make us healthier and live longer, and it will make us grow faster and have higher wages. It's kind of one of those things where they have to get in the room together and say, how do we tell a lie about this? Because they have no evidence. This is a simple question of corporations putting the health and safety of every single American at risk for the sake of their bottom line, and having Republicans and the Trump administration go along with it, and it's gotten to a critical point. I mean, one of the things, Tom, I've said I would declare a climate emergency on day one of my presidency. That's where we are.
And I agree with you. Thom Steyer, it's been great talking with you, sir. I wish you the very best.
Thank you, Tom. It's always a pleasure to talk to you.
Thank you very much. Thom Steyer, ThomSteyer.com is his website. He's running for president, and an amazing guy. At Thom Steyer, by the way, is the Twitter handle. Thanks so much for being with us today. We'll be back tomorrow, same time, same place. And in the meantime, don't forget, democracy is not a spectator sport. It's not something that just magically happens. It takes all of us, and that includes you. So please get out there, get active, tag you're it. We'll see you tomorrow, same time, same place. Have a great afternoon.
You've been listening to Thom Hartmann. For audio and video archives, visit thomhartmann.com.
We say fight back!